One summer afternoon in the small town of Arlington, Indiana, seemed as peaceful as any other day. In a place with only a few hundred residents, everyone knew each other. Everyone trusted each other. But that very peace concealed a terrible secret. On June 7, 2023, 17-year-old Valerie Tindall left home for work. She said she would be back for dinner. But as night fell, Valerie didn't return. Her phone went silent. And in the small house, fear began to creep in. The last person to see Valerie was her neighbor across the street, a 59-year-old man who used to hire her to mow the lawn. He said she might have run away. But the words came too quickly. Too certainly. Months passed. Seasons passed. Then, one late autumn day, the police and FBI returned to his property. Amidst a strange pile of rubbish, they unearthed a wooden box. Inside was the body of a young girl. Her nails were painted bright orange, the exact color Valerie posted on Facebook before she disappeared. It wasn't just the death of a girl, but a chilling warning: sometimes evil isn't in the shadows. It stands right at your doorstep. Valerie Tindall was born on August 29, 2005, in Indianapolis, Indiana, USA, into a large family. She had one brother and 3 older sisters. When Valerie was young, she experienced an unpleasant event, though the details were kept private by her family. Following that incident, her mother decided the family should move somewhere safer, a decision everyone supported. They moved to Arlington, a small town less than an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With a population of about 300, Valerie's parents hoped it would be a peaceful environment to raise their children, far from the hustle and bustle of the big city. Thanks to their friendly and positive personalities, the whole family quickly integrated into the local community. Life remained calm and stable until the summer of 2023. Valerie, then 17, was preparing for her final year of high school. She was full of expectations for this school year, hoping to graduate soon and begin her adult life. Besides her studies, she loves animals, enjoys taking care of children, and has dreamed of becoming a veterinarian since elementary school. She has always strived to achieve that goal. As a senior, Valerie worked multiple jobs to save money for college, as she didn't want to be a burden on her family. Normally, she took Wednesdays off to meet friends. But that day was different. Even though it was Wednesday, she told her mother she was going to work. By June 7, 2023, during summer break, Valerie was focused on working and saving money for college rather than relaxing. She held several jobs and typically took Wednesdays off to spend time with friends. However, on this particular Wednesday, June 7, 2023, she told her mother she was going to work. That day, Valerie planned to visit her neighbor, Patrick Scott, 59, who lived across the street. She often helped him tend his large lawn, and he paid her. He had a gardening business and sometimes hired her when he had a lot of work. They often referred to each other as friends, though Valerie's family suspected Patrick might have a different interest in her. Her mother grew uneasy when Valerie said she would spend the whole day working for him. Although Valerie's family had known Patrick for years and considered him polite and friendly, especially since Valerie was also friends with his granddaughter, her mother couldn't shake her concern. Patrick assured her that everything was appropriate, and his calm manner eased her doubts. Over time, the two families maintained a good relationship, and Valerie continued working for him regularly. By the summer of 2023, Valerie had been helping Patrick for about 2 years. Her mother believed he truly supported Valerie's ambitions and saw his jobs as an opportunity for her daughter to earn money for college and build experience for the future. Valerie played an important role in convincing her mother because Patrick paid her well and offered her steady work. However, there were reasons to doubt Patrick's character. According to her mother, he had staged dramatic scenes several times, and sometimes acted like a jealous boyfriend toward Valerie. Despite being much older, he often made insulting remarks about the boys she spent time with, which seemed inappropriate. After working together for a while, Valerie gradually became more comfortable with Patrick's strange behavior and simply attributed it to his eccentricity. Her family also felt reassured, as Patrick had a good reputation and was respected in the community. On June 7, 2023, Valerie planned to spend most of the day mowing lawns for Patrick's clients. She promised to be home in time for dinner, but when night fell, she still hadn't returned. Concerned, her mother tried calling her, but the phone remained unanswered. When Valerie's mother asked Patrick about her, he said that she hadn't worked with him that day and that they had no plans to go anywhere together. Her mother was stunned. She couldn't understand why Valerie would lie. She tried to calm herself by assuming that Valerie had gone out with friends or perhaps was seeing a new boyfriend she hadn't mentioned. Still, she planned to question Valerie once she returned. Since her daughter was normally open and self-reliant, that evening, Patrick and his wife, Linda, went to Valerie's house. Instead of offering comfort, Patrick suggested that Valerie had probably run away. He presented his theory confidently, but after a while, Valerie's mother began to sense something was wrong. Patrick seemed to grasp the situation too quickly, while Valerie hadn't been missing long enough to draw such a conclusion. There was no reason to believe Valerie had run away. She had never done so before, and she had no mental health issues or addictions. This disappearance was completely out of character. The more she thought about it, the more suspicious her mother became. She sensed Patrick was trying to manipulate her thoughts and steer the story in his favor. She started to wonder if he had something to do with Valerie's disappearance, which might explain why he was trying to influence her so strongly. Still, she decided to wait before contacting the police, hoping Valerie would return on her own. That night, she remained convinced her daughter was simply out with friends and would come home soon. But when the family woke up on the morning of June 8, 2023, and Valerie's room was still empty, her mother panicked. Since she still couldn't reach Valerie, she called the police. Valerie Tindall was officially reported missing, and an Amber Alert was issued. According to the family, Valerie was last seen around noon on June 7. Her mother shared her growing suspicions with investigators, who agreed that Valerie might be in danger. Police distributed her description, photo, and details of her car, including its make, model, and license plate number. They began a serious search and quickly questioned Patrick, not only because of his ambiguous relationship with Valerie, but also because she disappeared while on her way to work for him. Patrick had already been screened and had no criminal record, especially not for violent behavior. When first questioned by police, he appeared nervous and claimed he hadn't seen Valerie on June 7, saying their last meeting was on June 6. At first, his story seemed believable, but the police already had statements from other witnesses that contradicted him. Several witnesses reported seeing Patrick and Valerie together on June 7, the day she went missing. Some even multiple times. One woman said she saw Patrick driving Valerie's car. This immediately raised suspicion. When Patrick learned the police had this information, he changed his story. Now admitting that he had seen Valerie on the morning of June 7, he said he had driven Valerie's car to take her to a nearby town about 10 minutes from Arlington, dropped her off, and never saw her again. During the following days, as the police continued to question him, Patrick's story kept changing slightly. His final version during interrogation was that on June 7, he and Valerie met at a store in Shelbyville. He used his company car, and Valerie asked to be dropped off in a neighboring town. Patrick said that when she got out, she walked toward a light blue pickup truck driven by an unknown man, and he never saw her after that. However, shortly afterward, Patrick changed his statement again. He said that he hadn't dropped Valerie off anywhere, but had only driven her around town before returning home. A neighbor asked him to house sit while they went to work, so he left Valerie there. When he returned, she was gone. He assumed she had gone home. But when her mother came looking for her daughter, he realized something was amiss. Patrick insisted that he didn't know where Valerie was. However, investigators quickly determined that his story wasn't entirely true. He had at least admitted that Valerie had been at his house, which was the last confirmed location. Police also suspected he lied about being at work all day, which deepened their suspicions. To investigate further, police asked Patrick to hand over his phone. He handed it over willingly. Phone data revealed that he hadn't gone to work at all but had spent almost the entire day of June 7 on his property. The message records between him and Valerie were also revealing. Valerie had sent Patrick a single message on June 7 at 11:23 a.m., saying she would be joining him soon. Patrick sent her 2 messages afterward, one at 5:40 p.m. on June 7 and another at 2:46 p.m. on June 8, asking where she was. This evidence showed that Patrick had been lying from the beginning. He clearly knew about their planned meeting, and his attempts to contact her later appeared to be an act. Investigators also learned that Valerie's mother had given Patrick full access to her daughter's location data through the app Life 360 app in 2021. When Valerie started working for him, this meant Patrick could see Valerie's location in real time and didn't need to ask her where she was. It seemed he was deliberately trying to distance himself from her disappearance and build a false alibi. Despite their suspicions, the police did not have enough evidence to arrest Patrick. His constantly changing statements and attempts to mislead investigators, however, made him the main suspect. Investigators wanted to search his home, but needed a search warrant to do so. They decided to charge him with giving multiple false statements that had obstructed the investigation. While this was not enough for an arrest, it provided grounds for a search. Surprisingly, the thorough search of Patrick's house revealed nothing. The search for Valerie continued for months. It became increasingly clear that Valerie was unlikely to be found alive. She had been completely inactive on social media, had made no financial transactions, and had not used her phone. At one point, the investigation appeared to have reached a dead end. After that, on October 11, 2023, the investigators decided to carefully examine Patrick Scott's property. This time, they brought along specially trained sniffer dogs, believing Patrick was connected to the disappearance. Remarkably, all 4 dogs instantly picked up the scent of a corpse and ran in the same direction. Toward a small pond on the property, the officers called in a diving team, but no body was found. Still, the dogs continued reacting to the water. Handlers explained that this response was expected, as dogs can detect even trace amounts of scent that might have been carried by the wind and absorbed by the water. Although Valerie's body wasn't found, the dog's behavior strengthened suspicions that she had been on Patrick's property. As a result, investigators ordered an aerial topographical survey for the next day. This survey aimed to detect recently disturbed soil, which could indicate a burial site. Several areas on the property showed signs of soil disruption, but none led to concrete results. The investigation once again stalled for several weeks. Valerie remained officially missing, as there was still no definitive proof of her death. 7 weeks after the aerial survey, the case took a new turn. On November 28, 2023, investigators decided to inspect Patrick's property one more time. This time, both local law enforcement and FBI agents were involved. During the aerial review, they noticed a strange pile of garbage in an area far from the house, an unusual place to dump household waste. Investigators suspected the pile could be concealing something. Using specialized equipment, they detected shallow cavities under the mound. When the site was excavated, a wooden box emitting a strong odor was uncovered. Inside, they found the body of a girl wrapped in black plastic. Due to decomposition, her identity was initially uncertain, but investigators noticed her bright orange nail polish, matching the color Valerie had posted about on social media the day before she disappeared. The body was later confirmed to be Valerie Tindall. Patrick Scott, 59, was arrested and charged with her kidnapping and murder. After his arrest, Patrick resisted but was eventually subdued. During interrogation, he confessed. He said he had met Valerie on June 7 at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, having lured her there with a promise of lunch at a restaurant in Indianapolis. Around 1:00 p.m., he brought her to his home. Less than 30 minutes earlier, her phone had gone inactive. Patrick admitted to abusing Valerie and using his belt in the attack, a belt he reportedly continued to wear until his arrest. Afterward, he returned home and tried to delete app data and digital activity from his phone. However, he overlooked the Apple Health app, which retained crucial movement and time records that later supported the investigation. Patrick claimed that Valerie tried to blackmail him into buying her a new car, threatening to tell everyone that he had seduced her if he refused. This led to an argument that escalated into a fight, during which Patrick attacked her in a moment of rage. He insisted the killing was not intentional and blamed it on losing control. The incident took place in Patrick's bedroom. Upon realizing he had killed Valerie, Patrick took her body to the home office, a place other family members never visited. The body remained there for nearly a day, wrapped only in plastic wrap. On June 8, Patrick bought boards from a hardware store to build a makeshift box to bury the body. He stated that there was already a hole on his property, and he planned to fill it with cement. The size of the hole was perfect for Valerie's grave. When questioned, he could not explain how the hole had appeared, raising suspicions that the killing was premeditated and the hole had been dug in advance. Patrick later claimed he had planned to use it to dispose of old video cassettes. Investigators doubted this explanation. Why would anyone bury tapes instead of simply throwing them away? A new police report later revealed more about the case. It stated that Patrick invited Valerie to his home intending to seduce her. When she refused, he became enraged, killed her, and then buried her in the homemade wooden box. Investigators also determined what happened to Valerie's car. Witnesses saw Patrick driving it on June 7. To hide his involvement, he drove the car to a nearby suburb, removed the license plates, abandoned it near a housing development, and threw the keys into a river. The car was eventually found, but the keys were not, and Patrick later claimed he couldn't remember where he had thrown them. In early 2024, Patrick began denying any relationship with Valerie beyond friendship and work. But the evidence contradicted him. They had spent a lot of time together, shopping, eating in cafes, and even visiting a water park. As shown by photographs, Valerie's mother remembered her daughter asking for permission for that trip, believing Patrick was there with his family. Patrick's wife had also noticed his growing interest in Valerie but assumed it stemmed from his fondness for children and Valerie's friendship with their granddaughter. Nobody imagined that this seemingly kind man had inappropriate feelings for a 17-year-old girl. However, the investigation proved that Patrick had feelings for Valerie. What bothered the police most was his indifference, completely cold when talking about his crime and the young girl he had murdered. However, some people blamed Valerie's parents, arguing that her mother had ignored warning signs and trusted Patrick too much. Until the case was solved, no one realized how deceitful he truly was. Valerie's mother believed her daughter only worked for him. He was seen as a close family friend. Valerie had worked for Patrick for over 2 years, during which he gained her and her family's complete trust. She was also close to his granddaughter, which gave him further access to her. At a recent press conference, Valerie's family spoke about the trauma they endured and how Patrick's behavior changed once the search for Valerie began. He became withdrawn, avoiding her family and displaying hostility towards them. Whenever her mother tried to speak to him during the 5-month investigation, he would quickly flee into the house. During the investigation, it was discovered that a few weeks after Valerie's disappearance, witnesses saw Patrick burning various items in his backyard. He had built a large fire and had even torn down a shed to get wood for fuel. This behavior seemed suspicious, and investigators suspected he was destroying additional evidence. Patrick refused to comment on the matter. On December 14, a funeral service for 17-year-old Valerie was held at the Christian church in Arlington. Nearly the entire congregation attended. The entire community still couldn't believe that in their close-knit neighborhood, there could be such a cruel person capable of taking the life of a young girl. Patrick's trial for kidnapping and murder was scheduled for April 2024. Because he confessed to his crime, the trial was conducted under a simplified procedure, sparing Valerie's family from having to endure further pain by reliving the entire incident. Patrick maintained his confession, yet it was believed he might not fully grasp the severity of his crime. He went on to claim that Valerie had tried to blackmail him into buying her a new car. Ultimately, Patrick Scott accepted a plea deal, admitting guilt to murder, kidnapping, and evidence tampering. Under the agreement, he was sentenced to 57 years in prison. Valerie Tindall's family was satisfied with the sentence. As given Patrick's age, he will likely spend the rest of his life in jail. At first glance, Russell looked like the kind of man any woman would trust. He was polite, well-spoken, and carried himself with quiet confidence. To Terry Patzer, a young nurse, he seemed like the answer to her prayers. Terry thought she had found her soulmate. In truth, she had just stepped into the orbit of one of Florida's most sadistic predators. This is the story of Russell Tillis, the charming monster. In 1987, Terry Patzer, a young nurse, met Russell Tillis, a patient who came to the clinic where she worked, asking about tattoo removal. She found him strikingly attractive. His hands were well-groomed, his hair neatly styled, and he carried himself with an air of confidence. Russell wasn't just handsome, he was charming, attentive. During his visit, he showered Terry with more compliments than she'd received in the entire past year. Before leaving, he asked for her phone number so he could call her for a date. Blushing, Terry wrote the digits on a small piece of paper, a decision that would change her life forever. On their first date, Russell behaved like a perfect gentleman, further captivating Terry. He brought flowers, opened doors, and treated her with a kind of old-fashioned courtesy that felt special to her. While these gestures might seem ordinary to others, for Terry, who wasn't used to being prioritized or told how beautiful she was, they meant the world. She felt truly cherished, perhaps for the first time in her life. Completely at ease, she was already beginning to imagine a future with him. That evening, Terry opened up about her difficult childhood. She had endured a lot of pain, and as she looked across the table at the confident man smiling at her, she imagined him as her knight, someone who would protect her, lift her from her past, and show her what love was supposed to feel like. But perfect people don't exist. Soon, Terry discovered another side of Russell, one that was aggressive and quick-tempered. One evening, early in their relationship, they were walking down the street when two men made a harmless joke about Terry. She expected Russell to simply brush it off or make a firm but calm reply. Instead, he turned around, punched one of the men so hard, he dropped to the ground, and then threatened to knock the other out too. Terry was stunned and frightened by this sudden outburst of violence, yet she convinced herself that Russell was just being protective, that he was defending the woman he loved. Maybe he had overreacted, but only because he cared deeply for her. It wasn't a crime to want to protect your girlfriend, she told herself, pushing down the unease growing in her chest. A couple of months after they met, Russell suggested that Terry take the next step in their relationship, moving in together. He wanted her to live in his house. Although she had doubts, she ignored her intuition and agreed to do what her boyfriend wanted. Russell began to insist that Terry spend almost all of his time with him. At first, he simply became moody when she wanted to see her family or friends. Then, he began answering her phone himself, telling callers that Terry wasn't home, even when she was sitting right beside him. When Terry's relatives finally met Russell, he didn't leave a good impression. The man Terry had described and the man they encountered were two completely different people. They sensed something off about him immediately. For his part, Russell didn't like them either. The whole meeting was tense. Still, Terry viewed Russell as her destined partner, the one she was meant to build a life with. Since her bond with her family had never been strong, their disapproval didn't matter much to her. Terry had introduced Russell to her relatives only because courtesy demanded it. Beyond that, she planned to handle things on her own. When he had successfully isolated her, he began pressuring her to marry him. The first time Russell mentioned marriage, Terry wasn't enthusiastic. She felt everything was moving too fast. But soon after, she discovered she was pregnant, and she took it as a sign from above. When they got married, none of Terry's loved ones attended the ceremony. They didn't even know she was getting married. By that time, Russell Tillis had completely cut her off from everyone in her past. He had forbidden her from contacting her family or friends. According to Terry, that wedding, held in silence and secrecy, marked the beginning of her descent into hell. Not long after the wedding, Terry and Russell welcomed a baby girl. The young mother was so absorbed in caring for her newborn that she didn't immediately notice the strange things happening around her. The first warning sign was theft. Her ring vanished. Then, a pair of diamond earrings went missing. But what devastated her most was the loss of a heart-shaped necklace, a precious gift from her parents on her 16th birthday. It held deep sentimental value, something no amount of money could replace. Russell, however, didn't care. He pawned every piece of jewelry to fund his growing addiction to illegal substances. When Terry discovered what he was doing, she tried to persuade him to enter a rehabilitation program, but Russell flatly refused. Desperate and exhausted, she finally gave him an ultimatum: either choose his family or the banned substances. Things did not unfold the way Terry hoped. Instead of choosing to quit and fight for his family, Russell exploded in rage. He shouted that she had no right to interfere in his life, that his problems were none of her concern. Then, in a terrifying outburst, he grabbed her by the neck and lifted her off the floor with one hand. Terry struggled for air before blacking out completely. When she regained consciousness, she found herself lying on the floor, her husband looming over her. She didn't know how long she had been out, but what terrified her most was Russell's expression. He showed no guilt, no concern, not even a flicker of remorse. Coldly, he told her that she was living in his house, and he was the one who made the rules. That horrifying moment was the final straw. Later that night, after Russell fell asleep, Terry quietly packed a small bag, took her daughter in her arms, and ran away to her parents' home. But when she told her parents what had happened, instead of comfort or protection, she received reproach. Her mother and father said she should have listened to their warnings. They had told her from the very beginning that something about Russell felt wrong, but she refused to see it. Her parents, still offended that she'd married without inviting them, offered little sympathy. Hurt and feeling unwelcome, Terry realized she had nowhere else to go. She made the heartbreaking decision to return to her husband. After moving back in, things only got worse. Russell often disappeared for nights at a time, sometimes for 2 or 3 days, without saying where he was going. Terry didn't know what he did for work, and she was too afraid to ask. One day, she received a call from the local police station. Russell had been arrested for harassing women who provided escort services. When Terry went to pick him up, he swore that it was all a misunderstanding, that the police had wrongly accused him. And at that moment, Terry believed him. But when it happened again, and a second, and a third time, her trust in him began to crumble. Russell knew his wife no longer believed him. So every time he returned home after a short stint in jail, he brought her a gift. But these weren't presents wrapped in ribbons. They were random trinkets. A chain, a bracelet, a few hair clips. Once, he brought home a diary with its first pages torn out. Terry instantly realized where it had come from. These items were stolen from the women he had been with. women he had harassed or exploited. One evening, Russell brought something new, a Polaroid camera. This time, the gift wasn't for Terry. It was for himself. He ordered her to put on makeup and undress so he could take intimate photos of her. Naturally, Terry refused, but Russell demanded that she please her man. Reluctantly, she complied, sitting stiffly with a grim expression as he forced her into degrading poses. He tried to flatter her, but the tension in the air was obvious. Neither of them was enjoying it. Eventually, they began to argue again. Furious, Russell stormed out of the house and didn't return that night. Despite his cruelty, criminal tendencies, and worsening addiction, there were two important reasons that prevented Terry from leaving. Russell paid all the bills, bought food, and covered everything the baby needed. Terry, still at home caring for their infant, couldn't yet support herself. To go to work, she would have to find a nanny, something far beyond her financial reach. She didn't have enough money to rent a place of her own. Either, after what happened last time, she didn't want to go back to her parents' house because she knew they would only judge and criticize her. The second reason was more emotional. Terry's deep insecurity. She was terrified of being alone and clung to the hope that one day, Russell might change, that he would become again the charming man she had fallen in love with. Despite everything, she still wanted to believe there was something good left in him. One evening, Terry received another call from the police. They informed her that Russell was being released on bail after being arrested, but this time, it wasn't for his usual petty offenses. He had been detained for attempted kidnapping and abuse. That morning, Russell had left for work as usual. On his way home, he noticed a woman standing by the road next to a broken-down car. Pretending to offer help, he let her into his vehicle, but instead of driving her to the address she gave him, Russell took her to a secluded area, stopped the car, and tried to attack her. The woman fought back, screaming so loudly that two nearby men heard her and rushed to help. Stopping the assault in time, Terry was horrified when she learned what her husband had done. She felt repulsed by him, ashamed, afraid, and angry all at once. In her mind, this was the moment she could finally break free. If Russell went to prison, she'd have the time, safety to gather her things and disappear with her daughter. But the justice system failed her once again. Russell received only a suspended sentence, meaning he was free to go, and so, life simply went on as if nothing had happened. No discussions, no apologies, no change. Not long after, Terry found out she was pregnant again. The news crushed her. Any thoughts of leaving vanished instantly. How could she possibly escape with two small children? As the pregnancy progressed, Russell developed a very disturbing new habit. He would take their daughter out late at night, vanish for hours. Terry never knew where they went and was too afraid to ask. The little girl was far too young to explain where her father had taken her. When Terry gave birth to their second child, a baby boy, they appeared genuinely happy. Even Russell softened, showing rare signs of tenderness. For a short while, things seemed calmer, but peace never lasted long in that house. As the baby grew and his facial features became more distinct, Russell began accusing Terry of infidelity. He claimed the boy wasn't his son but the child of her former boss. The accusation was absurd. Terry had never had any romantic involvement with that man, yet Russell refused to believe her. His paranoia, possessiveness escalated dangerously. He told her he wouldn't lose her to another man, that if she ever tried to leave him, he would hunt her down and bring her back. Russell frequently threatened Terry with the firearms he kept hidden around the house. Once, he took out a hunting knife and began demonstrating how easily it could kill someone. He pressed the blade against Terry's lower abdomen, explaining exactly how to use it. He claimed he wanted to teach his wife how to protect herself and the children from an attacker, but it seemed more like a threat directed at her than a crash course in self-defense. Years went by under the same roof with a monster. Terry and her two children learned to tiptoe around his moods. doing whatever it took to avoid triggering his anger. Every day felt like walking on broken glass. Then, one day, the unexpected happened. Russell was arrested again, this time for possession of illegal substances. Fortunately, he was kept behind bars longer than usual. For Terry, this was the break she had prayed for. While he was in prison, she quietly packed up her belongings, gathered her children, and moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, the only one she could afford, but at least it was her own place. As Russell's release date approached, however, Terry's fear began to return. She tried to keep a low profile, avoiding going out unless absolutely necessary, terrified that she might run into him by accident. Deep down, she knew it was only a matter of time before Russell Tillis came looking for her again. One afternoon, as Terry returned to her small apartment with the children, she noticed a folded piece of paper wedged between the door and the frame. Her hands trembled as she unfolded it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Russell's. The note was filled with threats and venom. He warned that he would call Child Protective Services, claim she was an unfit mother, and take custody of their children. Then, he wrote, he would deal with her. Terry's blood ran cold. She wanted nothing more than to pack a bag, grab the kids, run as far away as possible. But once again, money chained her to the ground. She had no savings, no car, no family willing to take her in. All she could do was wait and pray. Then, as if fate had mercy, Russell was arrested again, this time for a different crime. Terry wasted no time. She found a lawyer and had divorce papers drafted immediately. Terry had already moved to a new address, a modest but peaceful home in a quiet neighborhood where no one knew her story. When Russell was finally released, he tried to track her down, but this time, he couldn't find her so easily. He showed up at her father's house instead, demanding to know where Terry and the kids were. Her father met him at the door, furious, unyielding, but Russell didn't give up. He switched tactics, crying, begging for forgiveness. He claimed to regret everything he'd done, said he missed his wife and children desperately, swore that all he wanted was a second chance, but Terry's father wasn't moved. He slammed the door in Russell's face, immediately called his daughter. From that moment on, Terry was constantly on edge. Every creak outside, every strange car that slowed near her street, made her heart race. She checked the lock several times a night and taught her children to never open the door unless she said so. But one day, her greatest fear came true. A car pulled up outside her house. Behind the wheel was Russell. Terry's heart stopped. Without thinking, she ran to the backyard, grabbed her son by the hand, and hurried inside, locking the door behind them. Her daughter was an adult by then and living on her own, but the old panic came rushing back. She peeked through the curtain, expecting him to storm the door, but he didn't. Russell sat there for a moment, motionless. Then, without a word, he drove away, as if he just wanted to send a message that he knew where she lived. After that, Terry lived in constant tension. Every morning she scanned the street before leaving the house. But as months turned into years, Russell never returned. Slowly, her fear began to fade. Maybe, she thought, he had finally moved on. Then, one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. Terry was driving home from work when a breaking news bulletin came over the car radio. The anchor's voice was calm but chilling. In Jacksonville, Florida, 55-year-old Russell Tillis has been arrested for kidnapping, murder, and dismemberment. The remains of 30-year-old Joni Gunter were found buried in the backyard of his property. The remains had been buried in a shallow grave behind Russell's dilapidated mobile home. Investigators said the victim had been struck multiple times in the head with a blunt object, possibly a hammer. In the following days, new revelations surfaced. Russell Tillis confessed to holding several women hostage, forcing them to live in captivity for months. He described his home as a house of horrors, He admitted to using the women as slaves to fulfill his depraved desires, and even worse, he let his friends join in, charging them money to act out their twisted fantasies. Terry realized, with a sickening clarity, that if she hadn't escaped when she did, she and her children might have ended up among those nameless graves, buried under the same soil that hid Russell's other victims. Russell Tillis was born on April 22, 1961. He and his brother, Claude, grew up in a modest home in Jacksonville, the same property that, years later, would earn the grim nickname, the House of Horrors. Their father, Claude Tillis Sr., was a crane operator who had once worked on the early construction of Disney World, but outside of work, he was an abusive alcoholic. When he drank, he terrorized the household, physically assaulting his wife and abusing both of his sons. When Margie Tillis, their mother, discovered what her husband was doing, she tried to protect her boys the only way she knew how. She sent them to live in a small trailer behind the house. The boys were forbidden from entering the main home or opening the door to their father. Neighbors often described Margie as a kind and soft-spoken woman, the complete opposite of her violent husband, whom many feared. Russell's childhood was defined by chaos and trauma. Without stability, he drifted toward petty theft, substance abuse. He was eventually placed in a school for troubled teens. By his late teens, he was already experimenting with hallucinogens and other banned substances. For a while, it seemed like he might turn things around. With his mother's help, he managed to quit using for a time and moved to California, hoping for a fresh start. There, he met Shannon, a 16-year-old girl 3 years younger than him. They met at a party, fell in love quickly, and before long, Shannon became pregnant. She gave birth to a baby boy, Russell's first child, but the happiness didn't last. Shannon soon realized something was very wrong. Russell was creating his own happy pills, mixing chemicals, testing them on himself. His behavior became increasingly erratic. Afraid for her safety and her son's, Shannon fled, vowing her child would never grow up to be like his father. Alone, Russell returned to Jacksonville to live near his parents and brother. He worked as a construction laborer and rented a small place of his own. But his old habits quickly resurfaced. One night, while driving along the interstate, Russell decided to help a woman whose car had broken down. Instead of taking her to a gas station, he drove her to a deserted construction site and attacked her. Miraculously, the woman managed to escape. Russell was arrested, but received only a suspended sentence. The leniency emboldened him. Far from rehabilitating, it sank deeper into violence. In 1993, he served a short sentence for burglary, then disappeared from law enforcement radar for nearly a year. When he reappeared, he was arrested again, this time for breaking and entering and stealing a car, which landed him a 5-year prison sentence. Behind bars, he began studying legal documents, criminal statutes. He wasn't learning law to change his life. He was learning it to outsmart the system. After his release, Russell's predatory impulses only grew darker. In March 2006, he spotted a 14-year-old girl walking home after missing her school bus. He offered her a ride, thinking he was kind. She agreed. But instead of taking her home, he drove to a remote area. There, he struck her and ordered her to undress. Panicked but quick thinking, the girl told him she was an escort, that he didn't need to use force. She would cooperate. The lie bought her a few precious seconds. When the opportunity came, she bolted from the car and ran until she reached safety. The girl immediately went to the police. Investigators took her statement and worked with her to create a composite sketch of the attacker. They even managed to collect DNA evidence, but it would take 2 years before authorities could finally link it back to Russell Tillis. Russell denied the kidnapping charge, claiming he had simply picked up an escort and hadn't realized she was underage. Despite his excuses, the court found him guilty, sentencing him to 4 years in prison. Upon release, Russell returned home to care for his mother in her final days. She was suffering from terminal cancer and had divorced her domineering, cruel husband. Though they continued to share a residence, Russell was also divorced at the time, and caring for his mother seemingly distracted him from his ex-wife. Russell's father was partially confined to a wheelchair, but his cruelty hadn't lessened with age. If anything, it had intensified. Russell harbored a deep hatred toward the man who had terrorized him throughout childhood. And now, as an adult, he wanted revenge. Neighbors often overheard the two men screaming at each other, their voices rising into violent clashes that echoed across the yard. Sometimes, they heard the metallic clang of objects being thrown. And more than once, police were called to the home. The tension took a heavy toll on Margie's already fragile health. In 2012, she succumbed to her illness at the age of 69, leaving the house to Russell. Within days, he evicted his elderly, disabled father, effectively cutting the last tie to his family. From that moment on, the modest house in Jacksonville's suburban neighborhood began to transform into something far darker. Over the next 3 years, police were called to the property more than 80 times. Neighbors came to dread the place. They frequently heard machinery grinding late into the night, followed by muffled screams. Women came and went. Some stayed for days or weeks. On several occasions, terrified women were seen climbing over the fence, running barefoot through the street, or pounding on neighbors' doors begging for help. No one dared confront Russell directly. Those who tried were met with threats. He told them he would kill them and bury their bodies in his own backyard. Some residents even filed restraining orders to protect themselves from him. Meanwhile, Russell continued to alter his property, erecting strange new structures that seemed to appear overnight. The once ordinary home began to decay, surrounded by piles of rotting garbage, old appliances, and broken machinery. What was once a quiet corner lot now resembled a junkyard. City inspectors ordered him to remove one of his illegal additions, but enforcement went no further. To hide what he was doing, Russell built a tall wooden fence and locked the gate with a heavy padlock. Later, he draped large tarps over parts of the yard to shield his activities from view. His relationship with his neighbors grew even more hostile. Russell began harassing them in petty but relentless ways. He installed a siren that blared through the night, forcing residents to call the police. Each time officers arrived, the siren was gone, and so was Russell. Next, he set up floodlights aimed directly into neighboring windows, bathing entire homes in harsh light until morning. When he tired of that, he began stalking the streets after dark, shouting obscenities, cursing at passers-by, and terrifying anyone who crossed his path. Repeated calls to police led nowhere. The lack of consequences only emboldened him. When neighbors filed restraining orders, Russell retaliated by filing complaints of his own, accusing them of harassment. He even bragged that his time in prison had made him an expert in the law, boasting that he now knew how to turn the system against others. None of his claims held up in court. As he rarely appeared for the hearings, residents learned to avoid him at all costs. Even simple errands, taking out the trash or checking the mail, became nerve-wracking. People looked over their shoulders constantly, afraid to meet his gaze. Between 1994 and 2012, Russell Tillis was charged with 9 different crimes, serving prison sentences on 4 separate occasions. His record included solicitation, burglary, assault, kidnapping, and battery. Yet prison never changed him. If anything, it made him more cunning, more manipulative, and far more dangerous. His goal is to make everyone around him suffer. In 2014, Russell once again drew the ire of his neighbors. His relentless stalking and threats led to yet another restraining order being filed against him. When he refused to comply with court directives to stay away, police arrested him in February 2015. He spent 7 days in jail. Just a few months later, in the early hours of May 28, 2015, Jacksonville police returned to his property, this time with 2 active arrest warrants for repeated violations. Earlier that day, officers had tried to arrest Russell, but he slipped away before they could reach him. Determined not to let him escape again, they decided to return after dark and catch him off guard. That night, they parked in a vacant lot nearby, keeping their eyes fixed on the decaying mobile home. One officer began tossing small rocks at the roof, hoping to lure Russell outside into the open, where others were waiting in ambush. Moments later, a motion sensor light flickered on. Russell appeared, sprinting through a neighbor's yard, trying to flee once again. Officers gave chase. When they closed in, Russell turned toward them, brandishing 2 knives, slashing wildly to keep them back. Then, without warning, he spun around and bolted in the opposite direction. Detectives followed, until they saw him abruptly stumble and fall. Russell had fallen into his own trap. For years, he had rigged the perimeter of his yard with booby traps to prevent anyone, especially his captives, from escaping. Razor blades, boards studded with nails, and hidden spikes were scattered across the ground. The officers surrounded him. With nowhere left to run, he was captured. Russell was charged with aggravated assault on law enforcement, resisting arrest, and battery. Russell then tried to justify his actions. He said he didn't know the people chasing him were police. They were wearing plain black clothes, and it was dark. So he thought criminals were trying to break into his house. Because he was scared and felt his life was threatened, he ran away. Not long after Russell's arrest, his cellmate, Sammy Evans, approached authorities with a shocking confession. According to him, Russell had admitted to killing and dismembering a woman, whose body he had buried on his property. The victim's name was Joni Gunter, a woman who had grown up in foster care and struggled with addiction, surviving through escort. To verify his story, investigators asked him to wear a wire and engage Russell in another conversation. What they captured on tape was horrifying. Russell spoke in chilling detail about keeping women chained up in his home and even allowing other men to intimate with her for money. Among those visitors, he claimed, was his own brother, Claude Tillis Jr. Russell told Evans that Joni Gunter had discovered something about Claude. Fearing she might expose them, the brothers decided she had to die. According to Russell, it was Claude's idea, but Claude couldn't bring himself to go through with it. Russell took over, striking Joni, killing her. Afterward, the brothers dismembered her body and buried her remains in the yard. Investigators searched the property and found decomposed human remains buried beneath piles of debris and the hidden traps. Forensic analysis confirmed the identity. Joni Gunter, age 30. On December 8, 2016, Russell Tillis was formally charged with murder, kidnapping, and human trafficking. By then, he was already behind bars for violating multiple restraining orders. When his trial began, Russell recanted everything. He insisted that his confession to Evans had been a lie, a desperate ploy to get himself sentenced to death. He claimed, after being hospitalized for 3 days, he and Evans devised the idea together. Evans, who was serving a life sentence, would pretend to be an informant, hoping the cooperation might earn him leniency. In return, Russell would get what he wanted, a quick death. In his version of events, his brother, Claude, was the real culprit. Russell claimed that one night, Claude showed up at his house with Joni Gunter's body already dead, begging for help in disposing of it. Russell maintained that he had no idea how Joni had died and had simply helped his brother out of misplaced loyalty. However, prosecutors saw through his story. They chose not to call Claude as a witness. Claude himself was never charged in connection with Joni's death. To the jury, Russell's shifting narrative felt like one final desperate attempt to push the blame elsewhere and escape justice. The trial lasted for years. Since his arrest in 2015, Russell pleaded not guilty, maintaining his innocence until the end. Finally, in early 2021, The trial officially began. Inside the courtroom, the jury heard recordings of Russell's words, his disturbing conversations with fellow inmates, and testimony from detectives who searched his yard. After 5.5 hours of deliberation, the jury reached its verdict. Russell Tillis was found not guilty on the charge of human trafficking. As the prosecution couldn't present sufficient physical evidence to support it, but for the kidnapping and murder of Joni Gunter, he was convicted. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 30 years for abuse of human remains, ensuring that Russell would die behind bars. For those who had lived in fear of him for so long, it was finally over. The House of Horrors on Jacksonville's South Side was torn down soon after the verdict, leaving behind only an empty lot. Among those who breathed a sigh of relief was Terry, Russell's former partner. When she learned the full extent of his crimes, she thanked God she had escaped when she did. Baghdad, September 27, 2018. The city breathes heat, dust, and tension. On a narrow street, a white Porsche creeps forward. Then, 3 shots. Sharp, cold, and sudden. The car jolts to a stop. Behind the wheel sits Tara Fairs, a 22-year-old model and influencer. Her phone pulses with alerts, likes, comments, perfume ads, as if life continues despite it all. Who pulled the trigger? And more importantly, why? Baghdad is used to explosions, but that day, the city froze. Because they didn't just kill a young woman, they killed a symbol of what cannot be tamed. Baghdad, a city where past and present collide at every corner. Here, new malls rise beside bombed-out blocks. In Iraq's capital, anything tied to women's independence is seen as a provocation to a system where the man remains the center and the woman his shadow. A woman can study, work, and run a business, but her safety depends on how closely she aligns with the expectations of family, neighbors, and the religious community. Any sign of autonomy is seen as a breach of order, and the punishment is not by law, but by shame, violence, or even death. After Saddam Hussein's fall in 2003, Baghdad formally adopted democratic institutions. But in practice, the state fell under the sway of religious factions and armed militias. These forces dictate what is allowed and what is forbidden. Their notions of honor and duty often replace the rule of law. For women, this means life under constant surveillance. If a young woman laughs too loudly, posts her photo online, or leaves home unaccompanied, she risks becoming a target. In households, conversations center not on a daughter's education, but on her reputation. Girls are taught early to avoid talking to men, not to meet eyes, and not to argue. Any deviation is seen as a threat to family honor. By the early 2000s, Baghdad had become a city of internal contradictions. On one hand, the internet, fashion, and social media emerged, and a new generation began demanding a different life. On the other, the old laws of honor persisted. On the streets, women in jeans and makeup could be seen, but behind every choice lay risk, condemnation, assault, exile. For many young Iraqi women, the internet became the only space where they could attempt to be themselves. But even there, freedom was an illusion. Every photo, every comment could trigger threats. There was no one to protect them. Police often refused to take reports, dismissing such cases as family matters. In this tension, a generation of women grew up aware that self-expression and survival demanded enormous courage. Tara Fairs became one of those who dared to break the silence. But even before her name became known worldwide, the country she grew up in had already learned to punish those who dared to be free. Baghdad remains a city where a woman must be cautious even in her thoughts. Here, the resolve to live by one's own rules becomes a literal test. Every woman who steps beyond what is allowed knows that a single forward step might be her last. Sayuna, East Baghdad, 1996. In a modest apartment, a large family lived together. An Iranian father, a Lebanese mother, and their 7 children. The youngest, a girl named Tara Fairs. The younger siblings shared a bedroom. While the older ones helped with household chores, the family was originally Christian. But at the age of 6, Tara converted to Islam. This change was formally documented, gradually became part of her daily life. Religious classes, new customs, and a different prayer schedule. For Tara, it was simply another must in her routine. Her childhood unfolded under a constant cloud of anxiety, punctuated by news of military operations and checkpoints on the streets. At home, the rules were simple: study, help her mother, and return before dark. Television was reserved for news or dramas. Music was played quietly. Every outing required permission, and addresses were written on a slip of paper near the door. School became Tara's first step toward independence. New friends, teachers, and extracurricular activities. On her way home, Tara's mother often overheard neighbors and acquaintances repeating the same phrase, which was that her was so beautiful and they wanted to marry her to their sons. It was not just praise, it was a marriage proposal. While her mother answered evasively, the idea of marriage quietly took root in Tara's mind. Everyone around her seemed to expect her engagement. Conversations about marriage became as natural as the changing seasons. Within the household, strict traditions governed everything. The older girls taught the younger ones how to manage chores, while the boys handled practical tasks. Their father demanded discipline and respect for their heritage. Family meals were shared, but conversations were brief, and personal feelings were rarely discussed. The outside world was judged through a single lens, proper or improper, and the family's reputation was treated as a fragile asset, easily shattered by a single mistake. In elementary school, Tara was a diligent student. Her notebooks were neat. She loved drawing, and she participated in school plays. Teachers praised her confidence and quick learning. Yet behind every achievement was a constant reminder to behave properly. Adolescence brings even stricter restrictions. Late outings were forbidden, and phones were checked, and curfew was non-negotiable. Her notebooks were filled with sketches of outfits and hairstyles, but these interests were kept hidden, as expressing personal taste often sparked conflict. Weekends were spent with relatives, where discussions of Tara's marriage surfaced repeatedly. She was treated as if she were already a future bride. While her passion for photography and fashion was ignored, by the time she entered high school, one rule had been firmly established: following social norms was the safest path. But inside Tara, a different instinct was growing: the desire to make her own choices. She shared this with no one. It emerged in small ways: determination in her studies, care for her appearance, and the wish to earn her own money. Conversations about marriage grew more frequent, specific, and in her family. Turning 16 was considered the start of adult decision-making. This was the foundation of her story. A large immigrant family, a religious shift at a young age, strict household routines, and early expectations of marriage. On the surface, it was a typical story from the Zayuna district, but it was here that the conflict began to take root between the path she was given and the life she wanted. A conflict that would soon erupt. Tara was 16 when she was married off. No discussion, no choice. Her relatives believed it was the right thing to do. Her husband was older, wealthy, and from a respected family. She remained silent, knowing refusal was not an option. From that day forward, her life no longer belonged to her. At first, it seemed like a mere formality: a house, relatives, tradition. But it soon became clear that this wasn't a family. It was a cage. Her husband controlled every step she took, banned phone calls, restricted visits, and demanded absolute obedience. Any word he disliked became an excuse for humiliation. Tara learned to live without the right to an opinion. Mistreatment became routine, and silence became her method of survival. She stopped meeting people's eyes and stopped speaking about the future. Pregnancy brought Tara a fleeting moment of relief. At 17, she gave birth to a baby boy, Amir. For a short while, being with him was the only time she felt truly alive. But her husband's jealousy, even toward their child, shattered that fragile peace. He refused to share her attention. Arguments became increasingly volatile. After one particularly dangerous incident, Tara fled to her parents' home. Her family hid her, hoping the situation would calm down. Just weeks later, her husband arrived with armed men. They stormed the house, shouting that the child belonged to the father. Amir was torn from her arms. That moment marked the end of Tara's fear and the beginning of something new: resistance. She had lost her son, but she realized she could no longer remain silent. She decided to leave for good, to go anywhere, as long as she never belonged to anyone again. After separating from her husband and losing her son, Tara's family weighed the risks and made a plan to leave. Staying in Baghdad meant constant threats and no real legal protection. The plan was executed quickly and quietly. The first destination was Turkey. There, they searched for temporary housing, applied for residence permits, and explored job opportunities. Tara didn't rely on formal employment programs. Instead, she built a portfolio, did test shoots, and landed small jobs with local brands. Her appearance and work ethic helped her secure short-term contracts, catalog shoots, runway shows, and beauty campaigns. The pay was inconsistent, but far better than random side jobs. At the same time, her family explored options in Greece, evaluating legal pathways, testing the healthcare system, and considering the future of the younger siblings. It wasn't a permanent move, but a backup plan. Some relatives stayed in Turkey, while others traveled with Tara. They split costs and responsibilities, avoiding dependence on any single country or immigration system. Jordan became a turning point for Tara. There, she found a way to secure both her family's safety and her own financial independence. After booking a few major campaigns, she saved enough to make a down payment on an apartment. The purchase was legally secured, ensuring the property belonged solely to her. It was the first asset that was truly hers. From that moment, modeling wasn't just a side job. Tara ran it like a business. She signed contracts directly and through agencies, scheduled shoots, managed prepayments and invoices, and ensured every photo met her standards. She built a professional reputation based on discipline, always punctual, always prepared, never causing drama on set. By the next season, she had regular clients, brands that trusted her enough to bypass castings. Her work in Turkey and Jordan complemented each other. Tara was no longer merely surviving. She was thriving. Gradually, the family stopped living out of suitcases. The children accessed schooling. The older siblings helped around the house. Financial struggles remained, but they became manageable. Rent, utilities, and food were planned in advance. Tara learned to navigate the seasonal nature of the fashion industry and set aside money for unexpected expenses. Yet Iraq never left her mind. The temporary safety of life abroad could not replace the feeling of home. She began analyzing the possibilities of building a career back in her homeland. On the surface, her modeling work was progressing well, but her core goal remained unchanged: to reclaim control of her life in the place where she was born and raised. The question wasn't if she would return, but when, and under what conditions. Once she had gained enough experience, contacts, and some financial stability, Tara decided it was time to return. She planned her move as a working trip with long-term potential: photo shoots, collaborations with photographers, new publications, and local projects. Her family kept their apartment in Jordan as a fallback option. The journey had been long. Turkey, Greece, Jordan, and now Baghdad. This was no impulsive decision. It was a calculated step after years of rebuilding her life from scratch. In 2014, Tara returned to the Iraqi capital and entered the Miss Baghdad beauty pageant. The event had a semi-official status, as the National Miss Iraq competition had been discontinued in 1978 and was not set to resume until 2015. The pageant wasn't officially registered, but it still carried local prestige. In the final round, Tara placed second, earning the title of first runner-up. While it did not provide national recognition, it instantly put her in the spotlight. Local media began covering her. Behind the scenes, photos from the contest spread quickly through online community pages. Photographers started adding her to their call lists. In the weeks that followed, the speed of public opinion in Baghdad became evident. Curiosity about this fresh face quickly mixed with gossip. People didn't just comment on her appearance, they dug into her past, her marital status, her habits, and her social circle. Invitations for shoots and interviews came alongside attempts to label her professionally. This actually worked in her favor. By 2015, she applied for Miss Iraq, the national pageant finally resuming after decades. It was then that her ex-husband publicly released one of their wedding photos. His intention was clear: to discredit her as a contestant and regain control of her public image. The photo sparked a storm online. Some demanded her removal on moral grounds, while others defended her right to compete as a divorced woman, equal to any other. The organizers did not make the scandal central, but the incident firmly cemented Tara's name in public conversation. The photo mattered not just for what it showed, but for what it caused. It revealed how, in Iraq, a woman's private life could be weaponized, and how quickly personal matters spilled into the public sphere. Tara did not retreat from the spotlight. She continued working, showing up on set, and maintaining her professionalism. For some brands, she was a risk. For others, an opportunity. A name that sparked media buzz meant reach. By the end of 2015, her rise to fame was no longer accidental. It had become systematic. She worked with a team of professionals, makeup artists, stylists, approving looks, scheduling shoots, and controlling what went public. Yet a bureaucratic obstacle remained. Her name was not listed in official archives of past national pageants because her first runner-up Miss Baghdad title had been earned during a period when beauty contests were unregistered by the state. Public reaction to her growing presence remained mixed. Criticism and praise existed side by side. New photo shoots provoked as much backlash as excitement. But for Tara, this marked the start of her public life in Iraq. She was no longer just a model working abroad. She had become a local figure, a face people talked about, followed, and judged. Her next goal was clear: to find her own voice and build an identity that didn't depend on anyone else's approval. This became the foundation of her next chapter. In 2016, Tara launched an Instagram account. At first, it served as an online portfolio, featuring professional shots and behind-the-scenes clips. Gradually, it evolved. She began posting short videos from her daily life, and her feed transformed from a modeling page into a personal blog. Her audience exploded. Within 2 years, she amassed around 2.8 million followers. People spoke not only about her fashion sense but also about her courage. In a country where women's independence still sparks controversy, she had become a symbol. Over time, Tara began landing major ad campaigns. Salons, clothing brands, and beauty companies all wanted to work with her. But she set firm boundaries. No contracts that required her to cover her tattoos or change her personal style. She lost some deals because of it, but what she gained was far more valuable: a reputation as a woman who stood her ground. Her content followed a strict schedule: photos, stories, live streams, Tara spoke directly to her followers, answering questions and sharing tips. To some, she embodied a new, liberated woman. To others, she was a provocation. Tara understood that visibility came at a price. As her fame grew, she faced the darker side of public attention. Waves of hate and threats. Hundreds of comments flooded her posts. Accusations of indecency, death threats, attempts to intimidate her into silence. Every photo was dissected. A tattoo, bare shoulders, dyed hair, each one labeled a disgrace. One photo in particular sparked outrage. It showed her from behind, partially uncovered, taken during Ramadan. Conservative bloggers called it an insult to faith, launching online campaigns demanding her account be shut down. Threatening messages arrived daily. Tara did not stay silent. In replies, she wrote openly that no one should be forced to follow someone else's rules. Her words struck a nerve. Arabic media across the region picked up the story. The backlash intensified. She was accused of undermining morality. Her home address was leaked. Brands were pressured to drop her. Some partners backed out, while others stood by her, seeing her as a symbol of independence. By then, Tara had become the center of a cultural standoff. On one side were millions of followers who saw her as a role model. On the other, radical groups who viewed her as a threat to the status quo. The louder she spoke about freedom, the harder people tried to silence her. Her inbox overflowed with not just insults, but graphic, detailed threats. Tara told those close to her that she reviewed them every day. She ignored some, documented others, but had no plans to stop. Fear became part of her routine. Alongside photo shoots and business meetings, Tara kept working. She kept posting. She deleted nothing. Her mission was simple: to prove that women have the right to choose and to be heard. In an environment of fear and censorship, that mission became an act of defiance. The day before her trip to Baghdad, Tara spoke with two of her close friends. The conversation was strictly business. Plans for an upcoming vacation in Malaysia, tickets, hotels. Yet her friends couldn't hide their concern. They reminded her of the threats she had received in direct messages and questioned whether the trip to the capital was even worth it. Tara responded calmly and firmly that she wasn't hurting anyone and she didn't have enemies. Her plans for the coming days were mapped out down to the hour. In Baghdad, Tara had a commercial shoot scheduled with a photographer she knew well, followed by several meetings to finalize branded content. At the same time, she was preparing her next batch of posts. Traveling between Erbil and Baghdad had become routine for her, and her shoots were carefully timed with road conditions in mind. That morning, she shared a few Instagram stories from the car, footage of the open road, stretches of highway through the desert, that her usual focused work mood. Warning signs continued to appear. But Tara didn't alter her plans. No, extra security. No, day changes. No trimming the schedule. That same day, new comments appeared under old posts, the usual mix of provocations. Tara didn't respond. In the evening, when entering the city, she turned on the camera to take a few quick photos of the trip that the audience was looking forward to. Her meetings were confirmed. The shoot schedule was locked in. She finished her last calls with the photographer and her loved ones. But something felt off. There was tension in the air. The flood of online threats seemed suddenly more real. Then she reached the neighborhood where the final part of her day was scheduled. Only a few work tasks remained. Everything seemed to be going according to plan. But in that moment, on that street, the distance between online noise and real-world danger vanished. In the first hours after Tara's murder, police began gathering evidence, reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along the route her Porsche had taken. One video showed a motorcycle carrying two riders trailing her car. The bike briefly pulled up next to the driver's side window. Then 3 gunshots. The suspects vanished down a nearby street. Investigators cross-referenced footage from multiple angles with witness statements. A suspect description was created and circulated among law enforcement units. Hospitals and motorcycle repair shops were checked. Phone records were requested from cellular providers to trace calls and track signals in the area at the time of the attack. Yet the murder weapon and the motorcycle were never recovered. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi demanded a full report within 48 hours. The Interior Minister announced that suspects had been identified, claiming it was a gang-related attack and that arrests were imminent. But the fact that none of Tara's valuables were taken cast doubt on that explanation. Journalists and human rights advocates questioned the official version. Rumors swirled about a possible link to the Popular Mobilization Forces, though no official confirmation was ever issued. The government centralized control of public information. Months passed. No arrests were made. No forensic findings were released. Journalists' inquiries were ignored. Witnesses weren't re-interviewed. And investigators failed to connect Tara's murder with other attacks on high-profile women. Requests for additional surveillance footage were denied, sometimes with claims that no recordings existed. Years later, the case remains unsolved. No suspects, no accountability, and the government's promises broken. Meanwhile, in August 2018, just weeks before Tara's death, 2 other well-known Iraqi women were found dead under suspicious circumstances. Plastic surgeon Rafif al-Yassiri, nicknamed Barbie, was declared dead from medication complications. Beauty salon owner Rasha al-Hassan reportedly died from a severe col de face. Both explanations came without medical documentation. Investigations were opened and quickly closed. Their names had already circulated online as cautionary tales for anyone living openly. On September 25, 2018, just 2 days before Tara's death, human rights activist Swad Ali was gunned down in Basra. Police attributed it to a dispute with her ex-husband, but activists saw a pattern. Threats had been made against other women involved in protest movements. All 3 women, Rafif, Rasha, and Swad, shared one thing in common with Tara. They were public, outspoken, independent women with strong voices and real influence. The methods of death varied. Gunfire, unexplained medical causes, but the message was the same: intimidation. In the wake of these killings, many female influencers shut down their accounts. Projects were canceled, and brand deals quietly disappeared. Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi mentioned possible coordination between the incidents, but no concrete actions followed. The potential link between these cases remains a topic of discussion rather than investigation. After Tara's death, social media erupted by Tavanzari. Thousands of posts flooded the internet. Students, journalists, and bloggers called out the police's failure and pointed to her murder as a result of systemic violence. Prime Minister al-Abadi once again promised a thorough investigation, but once more, there was no follow-through. Political science professor Hussein Alawi described the killing as a political message, a signal that the government had lost control over armed factions. In Baghdad, women took to the streets holding signs that read, "She wasn't the first." The government remained silent. Society did the talking. Tara was laid to rest in a Shiite cemetery in Najaf, surrounded by her family, a few friends, and a small group of journalists. Her final diary entry was brief: "God is kind, and whatever is written for me will be right." Her death did not end her journey. It transformed her into a symbol of resistance, a voice, and of women's freedom in Iraq. Her story inspired documentaries, articles, and social campaigns advocating for personal choice. Tara's name became a voice against silence. Even in death, her voice has never been silenced. 2 hooded men sprint down a quiet residential street in Woodland Hills, California. It's 4:54 p.m. on January 23, 2017. Their footsteps are hurried, their clothes splattered with fresh blood. Just a few houses behind them, 49 years old, Fabio Cementilli lies on the tiled patio of his luxury home, bleeding heavily after being stabbed multiple times in a vicious, deliberate attack. At that same moment, his 16-year-old daughter turns into the driveway, believing she's just arriving home from school. Within minutes, she will walk into the most heartbreaking scene of her life. A crime scene that will change everything. This was no random act of violence or failed robbery. It was the beginning of a deeply unsettling truth. Fabio, a man cherished by his family, admired in the beauty industry, and loved by many, had become the victim of something far darker. What followed would reveal a story of betrayal masked as love, desire warped into obsession, and a murder orchestrated not by a stranger, but by someone under the same roof, someone he trusted completely. On the afternoon of January 23, 2017, at 4:54 a.m., a 911 operator received an emergency call. On the other end of the line was a teenage girl's voice, trembling with fear, desperately pleading for help to save her father. Isabella Cementilli, 16, had just returned home from school when she discovered her father, Fabio, lying motionless in a pool of blood in the backyard. The scene was gruesome. Fabio had been stabbed multiple times. Paramedics arrived quickly, but it was too late. Fabio Cementilli, 49, was pronounced dead at the scene. At first, police suspected a robbery gone wrong. A neighbor's security camera recorded two hooded men running to Fabio's house at 4:18 p.m. Fabio's black Porsche was missing, later found abandoned 5 miles away with traces of blood inside. However, Detective Ryan Warren of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department soon realized something didn't fit. Fabio's Rolex was still on his wrist, and his wallet remained untouched. Nothing in the house appeared stolen or disturbed. No forced entry, no ransacked drawers, no open safes. The timeline was disturbingly precise. At 4:18 p.m., the two figures approached the house. At 4:53 p.m., Fabio's Porsche was seen leaving. Just 1 minute later, at 4:54 p.m., Isabella arrived home. It seemed as if the killers knew exactly when Fabio would be alone. 3 days later, Fabio's wife, Monica, held a memorial service in the backyard where he had been murdered. Family, friends, and colleagues in the beauty industry came to pay their respects. Overwhelmed by grief, Monica could barely speak, only managing to say that she was no longer a wife. But there was a stranger at the funeral that day. Monica's friend, Deborah Ord, immediately noticed a strange man mingling with the mourners. He didn't seem to know anyone, and had a bandage on his left index finger. Deborah was so unsettled that she secretly took a photo of him and gave it to the police. That photo opened a major turning point in the case. The man was identified as Robert Baker. Just weeks later, police discovered Robert was a registered felon. His DNA matched the blood found in Fabio's stolen Porsche, linking him directly to the crime. The next question was why Robert would want Fabio Cementilli dead. The answer revealed a dark story of deceit, obsession, and betrayal that had been building for more than a year. Robert Baker, 53, worked as a racquetball coach at an LA fitness gym in West Hills. He was charming, confident, and charismatic, someone others described as having an alpha male presence. But his polished exterior hid a disturbing past. In 1993, he was convicted of abusing his wife's stepdaughter. After serving his sentence, he married her, and the two later joined the adult film industry. By 2016, Robert was working as a fitness instructor, projecting an image of respectability while keeping his criminal history secret. That same year, he met Monica Cementilli. At 45, Monica embodied everything he desired: grace, wealth, sophistication, and the comfortable life he envied. She appeared happily married, with 2 daughters and a successful husband, Robert later claimed their affair began soon after meeting at the gym in early 2016. What Monica didn't realize was that she had become the fixation of a dangerous man, one willing to destroy her family to satisfy his own desires. Robert quickly set out to separate Monica from her usual life. He persuaded her to communicate only through encrypted apps like Viber and burner phones, tools that would keep their relationship hidden from her husband, Fabio. Investigators later found that half of all Monica's messages and calls were with Robert, more than with her husband and daughters combined. Half of her digital life revolved around him. In the fall of 2016, Monica's friend, Deborah, grew suspicious. She noticed Monica spending more and more time at the gym, always with the same man. When Deborah asked if she was having an affair, Monica denied it strongly. Concerned, Deborah warned Fabio to keep an eye on Monica's gym friends. Tragically, he brushed it off, saying he trusted his wife completely. After 20 years of marriage, he believed she would never betray him. He had no idea that Robert was already plotting his murder. Late in 2016, Christopher Austin flew from Oregon to Los Angeles on a ticket paid for by Robert. Christopher, 36, was a probation officer and supervisor of at-risk youth. He considered Robert a longtime friend and thought he was just coming over, maybe to play squash, enjoy the California sun. He had no idea he was about to be drawn into a murder plot. Christopher then testified that Monica had invited both him and Robert to her house for dinner. She served pizza and gave them a tour, highlighting the patio where Fabio liked to relax by the pool. She pointed out exits, blind spots, and the layout of the property. It was a scouting mission, disguised as hospitality. Around the same time, Monica contacted a security company to upgrade their home cameras so she could view them remotely on her phone. As a result, she could know exactly when Fabio was home alone and most vulnerable to being attacked. Robert was even more prepared. He bought GPS trackers and secretly attached them to both of Fabio's cars. His daily vehicle and his black Porsche, Robert can track Fabio's every move in real time. Christopher testified that Robert told him Monica was trapped in an abusive marriage and wanted out. Robert painted Fabio as violent and controlling, positioning himself as Monica's savior. But Monica's daughter, Jessica, later testified that she once walked into her mother's room and found Robert lying in bed with her mother. This wasn't about rescue or protection. This was about possession. Robert wanted her entirely, her love, her money, her attention, and he was willing to kill for it. The financial motive was also enormous. Fabio had a $6 million life insurance policy. If he died, Monica would collect the entire amount. His death would give her everything. No divorce, no custody fight, no splitting assets. She could start over with Robert, funded by blood money. By then, the planning was complete. They just needed the right moment. On January 22, 2017, the day before the murder, Monica texted Robert that Fabio was heading to the store. According to Christopher, it was the first time they had attempted to strike. Robert and Christopher were already waiting, weapons ready. But for some reason, Christopher couldn't do it. Maybe guilt stopped him, or maybe the timing wasn't right. Either way, Fabio came home safely, unaware that his wife had just tried to have him killed. But Robert didn't give up. He had invested too much. Monica had promised him money, a fresh start, and freedom from his own financial troubles. He told Christopher that once Fabio was gone, he and Monica could disappear together and live in comfort. The plan was simple: make it look like a burglary, cash in the insurance policy, and start a new life. That night, Monica's actions revealed her true intentions. While comforting her daughters and playing the role of a grieving wife, she was already planning Fabio's funeral in her mind. The act had begun. The trap was set. Fabio had less than a day left to live. January 23, 2017. The fateful day that shattered many families. Monica's plan required absolute precision in timing and a perfect alibi. That afternoon, she left their home in a black Ford pickup truck, telling Fabio she was going to Target. It sounded like a normal errand. Surveillance footage later showed her truck entering the Target parking lot around 4:00 p.m. Before Monica went into the store, someone climbed into her truck. Prosecutors say it was Robert Baker, who met her to receive final instructions for the murder. Once she entered Target, Monica established her alibi, texting Robert to signal that the coast was clear. Fabio was home alone. According to Christopher's testimony, Robert hid him in the trunk of a rented Nissan and drove to a location near Fabio's house. There, Robert handed him a knife and asked if he would go along. Christopher then admitted to the jury that, like a fool, he had said yes and had gone along with Robert. At 4:18 p.m., they jogged toward the house, pretending to be two people out for exercise, a disguise caught on several security cameras in the neighborhood. Robert told Christopher the front door would be unlocked. He said that she was going to leave it open. When asked in court who she referred to, Christopher answered without hesitation that it was the defendant. Indeed, the door was unlocked. Just as planned, Fabio was relaxing on his backyard patio by the pool after another successful day as a vice president at Wella, a global beauty company. He had built his career through skill and perseverance, mentoring others, and working with Hollywood clients. He never saw the attack coming. Robert stabbed Fabio multiple times in the neck, face, and chest. The assault was so brutal that Robert cut his own finger, a wound he later concealed under a bandage when he showed up at Fabio's memorial 3 days later. There were no signs that Fabio resisted, suggesting he was taken by surprise in an attack carried out by strangers, hired by the very wife who had once sworn to love him for life. Robert and Christopher fled in Fabio's Porsche, abandoning it about 5 miles away. The timeline was meticulously planned. At 4:53 p.m., they drove off. 1 minute later, at 4:54 p.m., Fabio's daughter Isabella arrived home. Her screams echoed through the neighborhood when she found her father's body and called 911. The operator instructed her to desperately try to save her father, but his injuries were too severe. Fabio was dead. Monica arrived minutes later to find police and paramedics surrounding the house. She immediately stepped into her role. When her friend Elise Bluel arrived, a stranger escorted her inside with a grim warning not to step in the blood. Monica appeared shattered. Elisa recalled that she had sat in shock, repeating that she was not a wife anymore. It seemed like grief. However, while Monica appeared to be in pain in public, she was secretly happy. That same night, while Fabio's body was still cold, she asked about her husband's life insurance policy, wanting to know when she would receive the $6 million. Her goal was clear. Money was above all. The pain was just an elaborate drama. For months, Monica kept up her image as a grieving widow while secretly continuing her affair with Robert. Police surveillance later caught them vacationing together in Las Vegas and Myrtle Beach. Monica even introduced herself to Robert's friends as Monica Baker. She was already living out the fantasy of their new life together. Built on her husband's death, Monica frequently called Detective Partial, but not to seek justice for her murdered husband. Instead, she asked for updates on the DNA evidence and how soon the life insurance payout would be available. She showed little concern for finding Fabio's killers. Her real focus was on getting the money. But investigators were watching closely, recording her every move, every call, every date. And her web of lies slowly began to crumble. By February 2017, Robert Baker had become the prime suspect. His DNA was found in Fabio's stolen Porsche, undeniable evidence of his involvement. When questioned about Robert, Monica insisted she barely knew him. She said she only knew him as Rob, a casual acquaintance from the gym, and claimed she didn't even know his last name. When detectives confronted Monica about the DNA evidence, she gave an unbelievable explanation. She said she had accidentally hit Robert with her racquetball racket during a game and had brought home a bloody towel from the gym. Investigators immediately recognized her story as a lie. For months, surveillance teams documented Monica and Robert's ongoing affair while she publicly played the grieving widow. The evidence piled up: encrypted messages on burner phones, purchases of GPS tracking devices, and proof of their continuing relationship so soon after Fabio's death. On June 14, 2017, police set up a sting operation. Monica and Robert were stopped for checking a suspected stolen vehicle. Both were handcuffed and placed in the back of a police car equipped with hidden recording devices. Their conversation was later used against them in court. They were arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit murder and first-degree murder. During processing, the overwhelming evidence against them became apparent. Police also placed Monica in a cell with an undercover officer posing as a fellow inmate. Monica confided that he was not just her lover, but her confidant and her everything. Even in jail, their affair persisted. Monica's letters were intercepted, signed Mrs. Baker or Monica Baker, and filled with intimate remarks. Recorded phone calls also revealed Robert professing his love for her. Their obsession blinded them to reality. They still talked about a future together. Despite facing murder charges, at Monica Cementilli's trial, Christopher gave devastating testimony. He had been involved in planning the killing and, in exchange for a reduced sentence, testified against her. He described how Monica had invited him and Robert to dinner under the guise of friendship, but had actually shown them the backyard where Fabio would later be murdered. Christopher testified that Robert promised him a share of the insurance payout. In a surprising twist, Robert later took the stand for Monica's defense. He claimed she knew nothing about the murder plot and that he acted alone out of obsession and desire to keep her close. Although Robert's testimony introduced some doubt, prosecutors presented an abundance of evidence: the GPS devices, the unlocked door, Monica's alibi at Target, her immediate questions about the insurance payout, and her romantic trips while Fabio's family mourned. Everything pointed to Monica as the mastermind. Deputy District Attorney Beth Silverman told the jury that this case was about betrayal. Monica had deceived everyone: her husband, her children, her friends, and the investigators. She had orchestrated the entire murder. The prosecution emphasized Monica's actions after the crime. That night, she left her teenage daughters alone at home, despite burglars supposedly having just killed their father. Why wasn't she afraid for their safety? Because she knew there were no burglars. She already knew who the killers were. Monica's defense attorney argued that she was guilty of poor judgment, deceit, and adultery, but not murder. He portrayed her as a foolish woman, manipulated by Robert's obsession. Ultimately, the jury had to decide: was Monica a naive, misguided lover, or the calculating architect of her husband's brutal death for money and passion? On April 11, 2025, after 8 hours of deliberation over 3 days, the jury found Monica Cementilli guilty of first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. The aggravating circumstances included murder for financial gain and planning to commit murder. On June 23, 2025, Monica Cementilli was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge emphasized that after reviewing the evidence, he found Monica to be the mastermind behind the murder plot. Robert Baker had already been sentenced to life without parole after entering a no-contest plea. Christopher Austin received 16 years to life for cooperating with prosecutors. Monica Cementilli sacrificed 20 years of marriage, her family's future, and her own freedom for a fantasy rooted in greed and betrayal. Her daughters lost both parents and now carry the painful truth that their mother planned their father's murder. Luigi Cementilli, Fabio's son from his first marriage, said that his father had worn the Rolex all the time and that he had been wearing it when he died. Luigi added that he wore it on special occasions when he wanted to feel close to his father. That Rolex, the one the killers could have easily taken but didn't, has become a symbol of what this case was never really about. It wasn't a burglary. It wasn't about material possessions. It was about a woman who wanted everything: passion, excitement, money, a new beginning, and was willing to destroy her family to get it. Fabio Cementilli built a successful life through hard work and dedication. He mentored young stylists, collaborated with Hollywood stars, and deeply loved his family. Several scholarships and educational programs now carry his name, ensuring that his legacy of kindness endures. But his life ended at 49, taken by the person who knew him best, loved him least, and coveted his wealth most. In the end, Monica got what she thought she wanted: a life with Robert Baker, just not in the way she imagined. Instead of enjoying luxury vacations and insurance money, they will spend the rest of their lives in separate prison cells. Their twisted love affair has been reduced to monitored calls and letters inspected by guards. This case stands as a haunting reminder that the greatest danger can come from those closest to us, the person we share a home with, raise children with, and believe will love us until death. In the quiet southern town of Springfield, Georgia, where church bells ring on Sundays, neighbors wave across white picket fences, and families carry last names that go back generations. Evil was never supposed to find a way in. Here, the Hyde family stood as pillars of success and respectability. But just before dawn on August 25, 2008, that illusion shattered. An emergency call came in at 3 o'clock a.m. from a woman whose voice was so broken, so mangled, dispatchers could barely understand her. She had been shot in the face. Her husband and son, two of Springfield's most respected men, lay dead in pools of blood inside their own home. The crime scene was chaos. Cut phone lines, shattered glass, gasoline poured across the floors, yet nothing stolen. No trace of a burglar. Springfield, located in the state of Georgia, USA, is a small town with roots dating back to colonial times. Despite its long history, it never grew into a major metropolitan area. Philip Martin Height was a 59-year-old real estate developer who had built a multi-million-dollar business. His partners included his son, Cary Albert Height, and several other relatives. A lifelong member of the Lutheran Church, he even served on the church council. Faith and family were central to his life. A native of the region and a highly respected citizen of Springfield, he was known for his contributions to the community's development and prosperity. His influence was reflected in the many positions he held: member of the board of directors of Effingham County Bank, president of the Chamber of Commerce, and member of the Georgia Coastal Rivers Water Resources Planning Advisory Board. He also took part in local politics. Philip met his future wife, Linda, in 1967 at a county fair in a neighboring town. It was love at first sight, and she returned his feelings. That same year, he joined the Georgia Air National Guard, serving nearly 20 years before retiring as a technical sergeant in 1987. After that, he devoted his time entirely to real estate and community work. By then, his eldest son, Craig, was nearly 20. A year after Philip and Linda married, he was followed by Chris a year later, then by the youngest son, Cary, 6 years after Chris. The two older boys were very much alike, sharing similar interests and temperaments. In many ways, they reminded people of Philip's own strict and decisive father. Cary, the youngest, was gentler in personality. He became the closest to Philip. As an adult, he followed in his father's footsteps, joined the family business, built a substantial fortune. He was active in the community and church and was highly respected in Springfield. Chris, the middle son, also found success in the construction industry and became just as prosperous and well-known as his father. Among the three children, only the eldest, Craig, grew up differently. He often referred to himself as the black sheep of the family, and he lived up to the title. He had been divorced multiple times, paid little to no child support, and showed minimal interest in his children. His eldest son refused to speak to him, considering him a failure, though the boy remained close to his grandparents and the rest of the Height family. Philip even paid the rent for the house where Craig's ex-wife and children lived. Craig simply couldn't maintain stable relationships with the rest of the family. By 2008, he was living in a small hunting cabin rented from a friend. He survived on disability payments due to a workplace back injury, supplemented by help from his family, especially his mother. Carrie, the youngest son, met a girl named Robin while they were both students at Springfield High School. They fell in love and stayed together through their teenage years. They soon married and had 3 children. Philip, the eldest, named after his grandfather, Mackenzie, and Ellen. The family lived in a charming home on a large property. Robin worked with horses and participated in the family business. She always described Carrie as a devoted husband and father, someone who had succeeded in building a stable, peaceful life. At 3:30 a.m. on August 25, 2008, the sheriff responded to a call from his deputy. He was told that 2 bodies had been discovered. As soon as he heard the address, he recognized it as the address of his friend, Philip Martin Height, 59 years old. The deputy sheriff received an emergency call at 3:00 a.m. from the victim's wife, Linda Height. It took some time to understand what Linda was trying to say, because she had suffered a gunshot wound to the face. Her jaw was severely damaged, causing her speech to be slurred and fragmented. At the time, Linda was 58 years old. She had dozed off on the couch and woken up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. Suddenly, she heard a loud bang from inside the house, which she initially assumed was thunder. But when she opened the bathroom door, she saw an unknown man pointing a gun at her husband. He fired immediately, shooting Philip Martin Height in the face with a shotgun and killing him instantly. The moment the gunman noticed Linda in the doorway, he turned the shotgun toward her and pulled the trigger. Linda was incredibly fortunate. She instinctively tried to dodge, though part of the projectile struck her face and shattered her jaw. She collapsed to the floor and lost consciousness. When she eventually regained awareness, she could see pieces of her jaw, teeth, and blood scattered across the floor. She crawled towards her husband, but he was dead. The attacker had vanished, summoning every bit of strength she had left. She decided to call 911. When police arrived, Linda was barely conscious. She had lost a great deal of blood and was extremely weak. Patrol officers began clearing the house with weapons drawn, but the attacker had already fled. While searching the rooms, they discovered Philip's youngest son, Carey Albert Height, in his childhood bedroom. He too had been shot in the face with a shotgun, just like his father. Judging by his position, Carey had been caught completely off guard and had no chance to defend himself. Experts later determined that both victims were killed at close range, no more than 2 meters away, with a 12-gauge shotgun. When the sheriff responded to the scene, he immediately contacted the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, aware that he was too close to the Height family to conduct an impartial investigation. When GBI agents arrived, it quickly became clear that the house did not resemble a typical burglary scene. Although the phone lines had been cut and a pane of glass in the door was broken, nothing was missing, not even cash left in the open. Furniture and belongings were undisturbed. Investigators began suspecting that the intruder had come to the house with one intention: murder. The gasoline smell Linda had mentioned was consistent with a failed attempt at arson. The attacker had poured gasoline through several rooms, but Linda's unexpected survival and call to 911 likely caused him to panic, abandon his plan, and flee. Forensic experts soon concluded that the crime scene had been staged and staged poorly. This indicated that the person who attempted the staging had little experience. One of the strangest clues was a key left in the lock of the very door whose glass had been smashed. It suggested the perpetrator had access to the house and had no real need to break in unless he was trying to make the attack look like a burglary. News that the influential Height family had been attacked spread rapidly through Springfield. Residents feared that an escaped inmate from the nearby prison might be responsible. But no such escape had occurred. Another early suspect was a young neighbor known for dealing illegal substances, and it seemed plausible that he might commit violence in search of quick money. However, after interviews and verification, investigators ruled him out. Philip Martin Height was widely regarded as a respected and generous businessman with no known enemies. His wife and youngest son, Carrie, also had clean reputations. Everyone who knew them spoke highly of the family. The motive for the attack remained unclear until the sheriff recalled a conversation he'd had with Carrie Albert Height about a month before the tragedy. Carrie had confided that he knew about his wife's infidelity, but refused to reveal the identity of the person involved. After hearing this, investigators decided to pursue the lead and immediately contacted Robin, Carrie's wife. By 5 a.m., agents were already at her doorstep to notify her of her husband's death and to ask several questions. Robin stated she had no idea who might wish harm on the Height family, but she admitted that she had indeed had an affair and deeply regretted it. Later that same day, she met with her husband's older brother, Craig Philip Height, with whom she had been secretly involved. Craig insisted he could never harm his family, regardless of the turmoil their affair had caused, and Robin believed him. But by then, detectives already suspected he might be connected to the crime. Once investigators uncovered the love triangle, a disturbing scenario began to take shape. According to them, Craig had smashed the glass in the front door to stage a burglary. In reality, he used a spare key that was always kept in the garage. Only immediate family members knew where it was hidden, narrowing the list of suspects. With the key, he entered the house, went directly to Carrie's room, and shot him in the face. He then moved to his parents' bedroom. Philip woke up after hearing the noise and stood up. But before he could react, Craig fired a shotgun blast into his face, killing him instantly. Linda, Craig's mother, was attacked next. To cover his tracks, he poured gasoline around the house. But before he could ignite it, he heard Linda awake and speaking on the phone. Realizing the police would be arriving soon, in his haste to flee, Craig left the key in the door's lock. The only potential confirmation had to come from the one person who survived the attack, Linda. Linda Height was rushed to the hospital and stabilized. She was placed on a ventilator and remained unable to speak. A county officer was assigned to guard her until she was discharged. Her sons visited her in turns. The officer noticed that when Craig held her hand while she was still unconscious and whispered that he loved her, her blood pressure spiked dramatically, from 100 to 140, and she began to tremble. Linda later dismissed this as absurd, insisting she had no memory of visitors during that period and couldn't imagine her body reacting that way. Even after regaining consciousness, she maintained that she hadn't seen the attacker's face and didn't know who it was. Craig Philip Height cooperated with investigators and didn't object to the search of his home and vehicle. He even volunteered, before being asked, that his shotgun, a pair of boots, and a gas can were missing. A search of his vehicle uncovered shell casings matching the type used in the murders, but the shotgun was never found, preventing ballistics testing. Though the attacker had made other mistakes in staging the scene, he had removed all spent shells from the house. Furthermore, Craig was the only family member without an alibi. He failed a polygraph test, and many people close to him described him as a habitual liar, making his statements difficult for investigators to trust. The community grew increasingly anxious during the investigation. The sheriff eventually addressed residents at a press conference, assuring them that the motive was personal and that the public was not at risk. Still, weeks turned into months without an arrest. Concerns persisted. When word of the love triangle began circulating, tensions escalated. One concerned citizen even called the FBI, demanding the arrest of Craig and Robin. But with no physical evidence against either of them, Detectives pressed on with their work. Circumstantial evidence began to pile up. One detective noticed bruises on Craig Philip Hite's arm that resembled marks caused by a shotgun's recoil when it isn't held properly against the shoulder. Craig claimed he got the bruise by slipping in the shower and even demonstrated the scenario during a reenactment. However, investigators found his explanation unconvincing. Additionally, Craig repeatedly lied to police. He initially denied the affair with Robin, even though it was widely known. Later, a realtor named Christie, whom Craig had contacted 2 weeks before the murders, came forward. She recalled that Craig showed little affection for his family, especially his father. When she asked about payment for a property, Craig said he planned to sell it later and receive a large sum. Then, details about changes to Philip Martin Heights will emerge, revealing a potential motive for Craig: financial gain. He harbored romantic feelings for Robin, jealousy toward his brother Carey, and resentment toward his father. The coincidences were striking. Curiously, immediately after the murders, Craig moved in with Robin. Acting as if nothing had happened, he used his brother's belongings, even driving Carey's children to school, while continuing to deny the affair and claiming he was helping the widow. Carey's children were fond of Uncle Craig, but the rest of the family wanted nothing to do with him. Craig himself showed no interest in interacting with them. He didn't pay child support, had no stable employment, and held a dubious reputation. Nevertheless, Robin clearly remained infatuated with him. Carey had already updated the beneficiary of his $5 million life insurance policy after discovering his wife's infidelity, but he had not changed his will, allowing Robin to inherit his estate. She lived off the inheritance, though the funds were soon depleted. On May 22, 2009, nearly 9 months after the murders, Craig was arrested. Although no direct physical evidence existed, investigators learned that Craig and Robin had purchased wedding rings and were planning to move to another state, Robin's birthplace. Fearing they might flee, authorities acted swiftly. Craig was charged with 11 counts, including 2 counts of first-degree murder, aggravated assault, attempted murder of his mother, malicious intent, robbery, possession and use of a firearm. A hearing was scheduled for December 2010. By then, detectives had been painstakingly reconstructing the chain of events leading to the tragedy. The 2008 financial crisis had severely affected Carey and Robin's daily life. As a real estate professional, Carey struggled with a collapsing market, forcing him to work long hours and deal with urgent problems late into the night. During this period, Robin was often alone with the children, feeling isolated and complaining that her husband wasn't paying enough attention. In April 2008, she began an affair with her husband's older brother, Craig. After a family dinner at a local restaurant, the two returned to the Heights home, and in a private moment, Robin confessed her attraction to Craig. He reciprocated, and they had intimacy for the first time in Carey's childhood living room. Their affair continued, with Robin frequently visiting Craig's hunting lodge. Despite this, Robin had no intention of leaving her husband or pursuing Craig fully. She was drawn to Craig, but insisted she still loved Carey and felt guilty. 2 weeks into the affair, she confessed to Carey. The revelation devastated him. However, Carey was strongly opposed to divorce, believing partly that he was responsible. He agreed to marriage counseling on the condition that Robin end the affair completely. Robin verbally agreed, but continued the relationship in secret. Lying to Carey, her unwillingness to cut ties with either man set the stage for the tragic events that followed. When Philip learned of the love triangle that summer, he was outraged and demanded it stop, threatening to cut Craig out of his will. He also shamed Robin, reminding her that it was Carey who had provided her with a wealthy, comfortable life that Craig could never offer. Serious arguments erupted between the brothers and Robin. Philip grew increasingly concerned. He shared details with his closest friends, and the stories were disturbing. His sons had threatened each other. Philip tried to intervene, but it was clear that matters were spiraling out of control. A week later, Carey hired a divorce lawyer. One of his primary objectives was to amend his $3.5 million life insurance policy. He removed Robin as the beneficiary, directing the payout into a trust for their 3 children. He also drafted a new will. At the same time, Philip consulted a lawyer to revise his own will. Initially, he planned to disinherit Craig entirely, but later reduced Craig's share from 1/3 to 1/9. The new will was officially signed on August 22, 2008. That same day, Carey was scheduled to sign documents amending his will to disinherit his wife. However, unforeseen circumstances caused him to miss the appointment, leaving the original will in effect. The following day, Craig arrived at his father's house armed with a gun. Another argument erupted with Carey over Craig's relationship with Robin. Philip, hoping to avoid confrontation, left the house. The day passed without further incident, and tensions seemed to ease. The next day, Robin had planned to attend a pajama party for elementary school teachers, where she worked as an aide. The party was canceled due to several attendees falling ill. Instead of informing Carey, she drove to Craig's hunting lodge and spent the night with him. During their time together, they discussed the escalating family drama. Robin expressed displeasure at Philip's interference, which she believed had influenced Carey's decision to disinherit her. Although Philip's primary concern seemed to be the family's reputation rather than his children's relationships, Robin saw his involvement as obstructive. Craig's primary concern was the will and the potential loss of inheritance. During this period, his resentment toward them deepened. The following morning, they was awakened by a helicopter circling the property. Craig tried to ignore it, but Robin was convinced they were being watched. And she was correct. The helicopter belonged to a friend of Philip, Martin Height, who had located them by tracking Robin's GPS on ratings leading Wunderman. Data likely provided by Carey. Robin suspected that Philip and Carey were gathering evidence of her infidelity for use in the divorce proceedings. She chose not to return to her husband's house, seeking refuge at a friend's place to avoid further conflict. She returned only on Sunday morning after church, planning to prepare dinner for her husband and children. Upon arrival, a heated argument broke out with Carey over her refusal to end the affair with Craig. Enraged, Carey left, announcing he would spend the night at his parents' house. That evening, Robin contacted Craig to inform him about her husband's behavior and the helicopter incident, revealing that Carey and Philip were behind it. This news infuriated Craig and further motivated his decision to commit a crime. On February 4, 2010, Robin Hyde was arrested and charged with threatening a witness. She was later released on bail and allowed to return to her mother's home in her hometown while awaiting her hearing. A few months later, she returned to testify against Craig in court as part of a plea deal, which led to the charges against her being dropped. Interestingly, Craig's mother and surviving brother continued to side with him, but his own son, Josh, testified against him. Robin's testimony proved to be the most damaging. She detailed the intricate family dynamics, the infidelities, and Craig's increasingly dangerous behavior. She also addressed her own questionable role, framing it as a product of circumstance. This revelation raised questions among the jurors. Why wasn't Robin considered an accomplice? Many suspected she had manipulated Craig, turning him against his family for her own gain. The motive seemed clear: money. She would inherit a substantial portion of her husband's estate. Robin had both the opportunity and motive. So many felt she could have influenced Craig to commit murder. The prosecution faced a significant hurdle because their evidence was mainly circumstantial. The defense took advantage of this weakness by portraying Craig in a more favorable light. They highlighted the lack of concrete evidence, like DNA, fingerprints, or eyewitness accounts, directly linking him to the crime. Throughout the trial, Craig insisted he was innocent and never admitted any guilt. Despite these obstacles, the prosecution presented a compelling case. They narrated the events with clarity and argued that Craig's motive was to usurp his brother's life, coveting the money, the business, the wife, the house, and the car. Penniless and unemployed, Craig allegedly resorted to murder to obtain what he wanted. The prosecutor argued that Craig's guilt was undeniable. Ultimately, Craig Philip Height was found guilty on all counts and sentenced to 2 life sentences plus an additional 85 years, effectively ensuring he would never be eligible for parole. Throughout the trial, and even after Craig's conviction, Robin remained largely indifferent and continued having affairs. When Craig learned of her betrayal, he was furious, believing he had sacrificed everything for her only to be abandoned while serving a life sentence. Robin, however, quickly moved on with her life, unexpectedly. This situation led to Craig's defense, securing a Supreme Court appeal. Robin's new boyfriend had taken the disassembled murder weapon to a custom rifle manufacturer, a friend of the Haight family. Documents accompanying the gun revealed it belonged to Carrie. Robin claimed she intended to restore it as a memento of her deceased husband. But the restorer suspected another motive and informed Craig's lawyer. Upon reviewing the documents, the defense realized the weapon had never been entered into evidence. They sought to have it tested, theorizing that the prosecution had overlooked or ignored evidence against Robin in their rush to conclude the high-profile case. The defense argued this could mitigate Craig's guilt. However, during the subsequent hearing, the prosecution successfully challenged these claims, and Craig's sentence was upheld in January 2013. Craig's mother and brother continue to support him, maintaining their belief in his innocence. Craig himself still denies involvement in the crime. Meanwhile, Robin remarried and moved to Charleston. She shares custody of her children with Linda Height. She was later arrested for attempting to pass a bad check, a minor offense, but was never charged in connection with the double murder case. Residents of Springfield, however, remain convinced that Robin escaped justice, viewing her as a manipulative figure who betrayed the family that had welcomed her in. It was meant to be a night of joy, music, dancing, and vibrant colors filling the streets for carnival. But just after 1 a.m., as the last fireworks faded over Veracruz, celebration turned to tragedy. Moments later, 5 gunshots pierced the silence. Outside the family home, Fidel Gonzalez, 27, musician, law graduate, beloved son, collapsed on the sidewalk under a streetlight. He died just steps from the door where he had taken his first steps as a child. This is not just a story about a murder. It is a story of trust turned into betrayal. A young man deceived by the people he loved and protected, and of a justice system so slow and broken that, years later, his mother still wakes each morning, fighting for answers no parent should ever have to seek. Fidel Gonzalez was born in 1996 in the state of Veracruz, Mexico. He grew up in a warm, close-knit, and loving family. Raised by his parents, Maria Isabel and Rafael, a doctor with a passion for music, Fidel learned early on the value of discipline, kindness, and creativity. From a young age, Fidel was loved by everyone in the community for his friendly personality and ability to connect. He was calm, sophisticated, always willing to listen and talk. Music, inspired by his father, became an essential part of his life. It was music that brought Fidel to the school band, opening the way for a lifelong journey with art. At 9, Fidel received his first drum set, a gift that changed his life. He instantly fell in love with drumming and practiced tirelessly until he perfected it. Not long after, his talent shone through, allowing him to join a local band formed by his brother and friends. Though much younger than the others, Fidel's enthusiasm and skill made him indispensable. Since he was underage, his bandmates often had to hide him backstage during nightclub performances so he could play without being noticed by organizers. As a teenager, Fidel became actively involved in community life, participating in cultural and religious events where his dedication and cheerful attitude stood out. After finishing high school, he decided to study law. Driven by his strong sense of justice and desire to make a positive impact during university, he joined student projects that organized events and promoted civic engagement. He is not someone who enjoys a leisurely life, but is always oriented toward the goal of serving the community. Believing deeply in the power of the law to create positive change, he takes on the role of local youth coordinator and works with passion. Through this position, Fidel motivated young people to participate in sports, cultural programs, and community initiatives that encouraged growth and unity. Although he is active in social work, he is reserved in his personal life. Around 2022, those close to him recalled that he began a relationship with a young woman named Michelle Acosta. Mitchell, born in 2003, was the daughter of Miriam. She grew up in an environment where Mexican and American cultures intersected, a place where she had lived for many years. This gave her a unique perspective on life. From an early age, she was bold, independent, and curious, yet also sensitive and introspective. Living in the U.S. had a lasting influence on Michelle's worldview and personal style. As she matured, her striking appearance drew attention. Her blue eyes and long lashes made her stand out. She participated in local beauty pageants in Veracruz, eventually winning one and gaining recognition in her community. This success led her to explore modeling.com, where she combined her confidence, charm, and individuality. When Fidel and Michelle met, he was 26 and she was about 19. They seemed like a typical young couple, sharing dates, attending local events, and spending time with family. At first, their relationship appeared calm and affectionate, filled with joy and closeness. However, over time, that harmony started to fade. Friends later said Michelle's true personality began to show: volatile, controlling, and increasingly toxic. Her unpredictable temper caused frequent tension. At the time, she was not living with her parents, and after several heated arguments, her family decided she needed to move out. Michelle went to live with an uncle under challenging circumstances, a decision that would influence later events. According to friends, jealousy was a constant issue in her relationship with Fidel. She disliked his involvement in music, fearing his performances would attract attention from other women. Over time, Michelle's possessiveness grew stronger, extending even to Fidel's own family. She often forced him to skip traditional Sunday lunches that were an important part of the family, a time filled with laughter, stories, and music. Those close to them later recalled that Michelle's reactions could be violent, screaming, cursing, and sometimes even physical violence when things didn't go her way. By mid-2023, Michelle had nearly isolated Fidel from everyone. He stopped playing music and drifted away from his family, abandoning the two things that had always defined him: his passion and his sense of belonging. Their relationship lasted less than a year, but the strain was evident to everyone around him. When Fidel graduated from university with a law degree, a goal he had worked tirelessly to achieve, Michelle was absent. She didn't attend the ceremony or join the family celebrations that followed. The silence between them had become unbearable. Then came the night of August 14, 2023, a Sunday marked by the joyous, bustling atmosphere of carnival. The small town was filled with music, color, and celebration. But shortly after 1 a.m., the joyful atmosphere was shattered by gunfire echoing through the streets near Fidel's home. Neighbors froze, sensing instantly that something terrible had occurred. Within moments, Fidel's parents rushed outside in panic. What they found was every parent's worst fear: their son lying on the pavement, gravely injured, just steps from their doorstep. There was no time to call for help. His father, a doctor who had saved many lives, could do nothing. Fidel's life slipped away in moments. Later, Witnesses and relatives helped reconstruct the tragic events of that night. The confrontation had begun hours earlier during the final night of Carnival. Both Fidel and Michelle had attended separately, Fidel with friends and family, and Michelle arriving later with a group of men. At some point, they crossed paths. Witnesses said Fidel saw Michelle flirting with other men. Hurt and angry, he confronted her, leading to a public argument. But this was no ordinary lover's quarrel. Two men involved with Michelle that night would play a central role in what happened next. One was Victor, Fidel's childhood best friend. Orphaned at a young age, Victor had grown up alongside Fidel, spending much of his youth at the Gonzalez home. The other was Jesus, Victor's half-brother. Their family had a troubled past. Their father was serving time for killing a police officer and kidnapping a young woman. Over time, Fidel grew distant from Victor and Jesus. While he devoted himself to studying and music, they reportedly became involved in crime, including a local gang suspected of stealing trailers, something Fidel strongly disapproved of. Still, there had once been a bond between them, one that would now end in betrayal. That night, tempers flared. Fidel confronted Jesus, and the argument quickly turned into a physical fight. Witness described pushing, punches, and chaos. Victor intervened, making things worse. Some bystanders even claimed to have heard threats, death threats. At the height of the confrontation, Fidel, perhaps still hoping that Victor and Jesus would not harm him, chose to ignore the threats. After the fight ended, he left the festival with a friend who tried to calm him down. Eventually, the friend took Fidel home, a moment he would regret for the rest of his life. Just minutes before Fidel was due to return home that evening, Michelle showed up at his family home. She was visibly nervous and appeared to be under the influence of alcohol. Her behavior was erratic, as if she were burdened by something. She then quietly went upstairs to Fidel's room and took one of his cell phones and quickly left the house. Instead of going home, Michelle went to the nearby home of Fidel's sister, Sandra, who lived just 2 blocks away. Sandra later recounted that Michelle asked to borrow a phone charger, but as soon as she plugged it in, she began transferring files and data from Fidel's phone to her own. A few minutes later, when Sandra's mother called to ask whether she had seen Michelle, Sandra replied that Michelle was with her and said that it was the only place she felt safe. Her mother, Puzled, asked what Michelle needed protection from. At the time, Sandra did not know. I just thought it was a small argument between Michelle and Fidel. Nothing to worry about. Later that night, Fidel returned home and spoke briefly with his mother. She asked if he had spoken to Michelle, as Michelle had been trying to contact him all night. Fidel seemed calm and told her there was no reason to worry. He then took several short, interrupted phone calls. According to one witness, during one of those calls, he told Michelle he was stepping outside. Security cameras in the neighborhood later revealed what happened next. A black car slowly drove down the street, turned around and parked near Fidel's house. A few minutes later, a gray pickup truck appeared and stopped in the middle of the road, blocking any possible escape route. Soon after, Fidel stepped outside. He walked up to the black car, leaned toward the driver's window, and exchanged a few words with the person inside. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Without warning, the passenger door opened. A man got out, aimed a gun at Fidel's chest, and fired 5 times. Breaking the silence of the night, Fidel's mother, standing near the gate, saw the attackers' faces as they got back into the car. One was still holding the gun. In that moment, she recognized him. It was someone her son had once called a friend. Shocked, she could hardly believe it. Witnesses later reported that 6 men had participated, fleeing in the 2 vehicles. Investigators identified the shooter as Victor, Fidel's former best friend, along with 3 accomplices. All 4 were members of a criminal group involved in hijacking cargo trucks. In the gray pickup truck were Jesus, Victor's half-brother. and Edson, who already had a criminal record for dealing banned substances near schools. Nearby, Michel, who had arrived with Fidel's sister, stood frozen as chaos erupted. When she realized what had occurred, she went up to Fidel's mother briefly. Their exchange was tense, filled with confusion and disbelief. Then Michel turned and ran, disappearing into the night. By then, Fidel's family was convinced she had been involved. Rumors quickly spread, whispers of an affair between Michel and Jesus, one of the men at the scene. Witnesses claimed to have seen them together the previous night at a ranch outside town. To Fidel's family, it seemed undeniable. Michel had lured Fidel outside under the pretense of reconciliation. Knowing the men were waiting to attack, when the family filed a police report hours later, all suspects had already fled. According to Fidel's mother, their escape was allegedly aided by certain local police officers. When officers arrived at the house, some claimed they needed to secure the area. However, they appeared more interested in taking the security cameras. Realizing this, Fidel's mother, Maria, confronted them, forced them out, and locked the door, determined to wait for the state prosecutor's forensic team. Her quick thinking preserved the video footage, which later became crucial evidence for investigators. As news of the murder spread, outrage grew. Neighbors, friends, and community groups demanded justice, organizing vigils and marches. Online, the case went viral, not only because of its brutality, but because the suspects were people once close to Fidel. 4 days after the murder, Micho, identified by the family as the possible mastermind, crossed the border into the United States, where she had lived on and off for years. She left behind a grieving town, a devastated family, and an unfolding investigation that revealed a web of betrayal. Around the same time, messages between Michel and Sandra, Fidel's sister, began circulating online. In them, Michel wrote defensively and emotionally, insisting she wasn't a murderer, and that those who truly knew her understood she wasn't the person being portrayed in the media. According to Michel's account, she went to the carnival with a trusted friend. They watched the parade together and later sat in the town square to talk. She said she saw Fidel from afar with his group of friends, but he didn't approach her. Michel claimed she tried to talk to him, but he refused. She maintained that she had been wrongly accused and that no one had ever listened to her version of the events. She said her departure from Mexico was not an escape, but a desperate reaction to death threats she received after the tragedy. However, Sandra didn't believe her. In her messages, Sandra directly questioned Michel about Victor's presence at the scene and the real cause of the confrontation that night. Sandra also accused Michel of harboring resentment toward Fidel, a bitterness that may have led her to want to harm him. Michel denied this coldly, insisting she had nothing to do with the incident. She claimed she wasn't even present during the fight and that she had been with Sandra at that time. 3 months after Fidel's murder, police in Querétaro arrested Victor and several other suspects for an alleged vehicle theft. The family began to hope for progress, but a few hours later, the prosecutor's office issued a contradictory statement, denying that Victor was among those detained. The reversal stirred confusion and anger. According to Maria, Fidel's mother, someone had paid to have Victor released, and she believed the prosecutor's office was involved in covering it up. There were also rumors that Victor had been given a safe house to hide in. Meanwhile, Jesus was arrested later in Puebla. Investigators identified him as the mastermind, who organized the group and ordered the attack. The suspects were charged with complicity, concealment, and aggravated murder. From the start, Fidel's family faced obstacles and endless delays. The accused used legal maneuvers, appeals, and procedural delays to stall the trial. Fidel's mother, Maria, repeatedly condemned the way these tactics allowed suspects to evade, capture, or regain their freedom. Some judges, she said, rejected new evidence or postponed hearings without explanation. while others granted unjustified procedural benefits for such a severe crime. Amid this bureaucratic struggle, Maria began receiving threats warning her to abandon the pursuit of justice for her son. She didn't know who was behind the threats, perhaps relatives of the accused or even people within the justice system. Despite the fear, she swore to continue. On May 24, 2024, there was a new development. Michelle was detained in Texas. Her visa had expired, making her stay in the United States illegal. The Veracruz State Prosecutor's Office had already issued an Interpol red notice, but U.S. authorities did not yet have a valid court order from Mexico directly linking her to the crime, due to insufficient evidence. Since Michelle did not appear in any of the surveillance footage from the murder scene, Mexican authorities could not yet prove her involvement. According to Maria, U.S. agents only learned about the case through social media, not any formal communication from Mexico. When detained, Michelle did not resist. She was taken to an immigration center to verify her legal status and determine whether deportation or extradition was possible. Police had stopped her during a routine patrol and, after confirming her expired visa and the Interpol alert, requested assistance. Her arrest triggered official discussions about her possible return to Mexico. Soon after, Michelle's mother spoke out, saying her daughter had been detained only for immigration reasons. She insisted there was no evidence that Michelle was involved in Fidel's assassination and accused the media of exaggerating the story. Reports later indicated that Michelle had married and had a child. She was eventually released and resumed life in the United States. However, her freedom was short-lived. In October 2025, local police, working with federal agents, captured her again following renewed coordination with Mexican authorities and Interpol. This time, her extradition was approved, and the process to return her to Mexico began to accelerate. 2 years after Fidel's death, only 3 of the 7 suspects were still in custody. The others had been released or remained at large. Authorities offered a reward of about $18,000 for information leading to Victor's capture. The man believed to have fired the fatal shot. For Maria Isabel, the pain is still deep and unresolved. The institutions that should have protected her have failed, leaving her feeling abandoned and betrayed by the system she once trusted. Yet, despite the threats, setbacks, and heartbreak, she keeps fighting. Her steady but sorrowful voice delivers one message: justice for Fidel. On February 5, 2001, a warehouse manager in Las Vegas contacted the police after detecting a foul odor coming from one of the storage units. When police arrived, they found a sealed plastic trash barrel inside. The barrel contained a badly decomposed body. Initially, officers thought it was a child, but when the plastic wrap was removed, they were shocked to find the remains of a frail, elderly woman. In the same unit, police found a purse with an ID identifying the victim as Christine Smith, along with books including the Satanic Bible and the Geography of Witchcraft. Through forensic analysis and cross-referencing missing persons reports, detectives established that Christine had disappeared 3 years earlier. Her face was covered with a plastic bag, suggesting suffocation or asphyxiation. But due to decomposition, the exact cause of death could not be determined. Christine Smith was born in 1932, during the Great Depression, to a family of Eastern European immigrants. Her childhood was extremely difficult. Her parents reportedly exploited her, forcing the teenage Christine to serve adult men. She dropped out of school at 13 and married at 16. Her first marriage was abusive. Her husband continued the cycle of exploitation, forcing her into escort. She endured humiliation and fear, but managed to escape after about 2 years. Christine's second husband was Leroy Smith, a U.S. Army veteran and former El Paso police officer. Together, they had 2 children, Brookie and Travis. After Leroy lost his police job, the family moved to California in search of better economic opportunities. Leroy himself was a highly controversial figure, openly proclaiming white supremacy, practicing Satanism, and heavily involved in the occult. Life under the same roof with him was far from ideal. Leroy's own childhood had been traumatic. Born to Russian immigrant parents, he witnessed his father murder his mother with an axe at the age of 5. He was then placed in the care of his 3 older sisters, who quickly grew tired of raising him. They sent him off on a bus with a note claiming he was an orphan, leaving him alone among strangers. A kind woman took him in, but she was homeless and an alcoholic, so his hardships continued. Leroy lived for 11 years in a tent on the streets with her and her acquaintances. Later, he joined the U.S. Army and never saw the woman who had raised him again. At 18, he met Christine, who would later become his wife. At that point, the lives of 2 young people with traumatic pasts could have taken a better path. They could have supported each other and healed together. But unfortunately, that never happened. After marrying, Leroy left the army and became a police officer. His abusive childhood soon resurfaced in dangerous ways. He began abusing his authority and flaunting his position. Someone like Leroy, critics argued, should never have been given power as a law enforcement officer. Not only did he openly advocate white supremacy and routinely bully people of color, while on police duty he stole from those he arrested, pocketing money, possessing banned substances, and even reselling them. He frequently exploited escort, coercing them into providing services for free. His constant access to banned substances and alcohol fueled a severe addiction. Leroy drank hard liquor like water. Prescription medications were left unguarded in kitchen cabinets and drawers. Christine, for her part, was far from an ideal wife or mother. She tried to numb the pain of her traumatic childhood and her difficult life with alcohol. She rarely worked, spending much of her time in bars. This, of course, angered Leroy even more, leading to public scandals, and the fights became more frequent. Both parents were consumed by jealousy, resentment, and personal chaos, leaving little to no attention for their children. Brookie and Travis essentially grew up like orphans, left to fend for themselves from infancy. By the time Brookie turned 7, Leroy had been fired from the police for theft. Hoping for a fresh start, the family relocated to Bakersfield, California. But any hope for a stable life quickly dissolved. Christine and Leroy didn't rent a proper home. They stayed in cheap motels and often left the children unattended while they partied, sometimes not returning for days. Brookie had to care for her 4-year-old brother, Travis, and often begged for food from other motel guests. When their parents eventually returned, the children endured constant insults and beatings. Their bodies were frequently bruised, scratched because Leroy would lash out with anything at hand. For Brookie, it was sometimes a relief when her parents didn't return. In short, the cycle of abuse continued. Christine and Leroy, shaped by their own traumatic childhoods, had little incentive to change. They repeated the same destructive behaviors with their children, turning Brookie's and Travis's early years into a living nightmare. Leroy's repeated infidelities sparked constant fights, culminating in one night when, after an argument, Christine took a gun and pointed it at Leroy while he slept. She pulled the trigger, but the gun was unloaded. No one was hurt. Whether Christine intended to punish her husband or knew the gun was empty remains unclear. Brookie and Travis were forced to move from motel to motel, living half-starved, unprotected, and beaten for minor offenses. It is no surprise that both children became emotionally broken. Eventually, the household became unbearable. Christine and Leroy separated. Leroy, tired of his wife's constant accusations, took the children with him, perhaps hoping to hurt Christine further. Leroy moved in with a mistress he had been seeing during his marriage. Christine, meanwhile, began a relationship with a married man named David. The fling ended quickly, with David urging her to part ways amicably, but Christine was unwilling to accept being rejected, seeking revenge. She arranged a meeting with David in a busy bar, ostensibly to discuss their breakup. Fearing trouble, David brought his wife along, but Christine, consumed with rage, smuggled a gun in her coat and at one point aimed it at David, attempting to shoot him. She was arrested for assault and attempted murder. Later sentenced to 14 years in prison, now Leroy has to tell the children that their mother will be going away for a long time. Brookie understood the situation, but little Travis needed an explanation. Leroy concocted a lie, telling Travis that his mother had died. He didn't deliver the lie himself. Instead, he forced Brookie to tell her younger brother. When Brookie started school, she immediately became the target of bullying after her classmates learned that her mother had been imprisoned for attempted murder. Children can be cruel, and Brookie quickly felt unsafe both at school and at home. School only magnified her problems. Instead of stepping in to protect or support his children, Leroy decided he had been too hasty in taking custody of them. One day, he loaded Brookie and Travis into the car and drove them to an orphanage. Ironically, this turned out to be the best decision Leroy ever made. For the first time, the siblings experienced genuine care. A calm, orderly environment, full meals, and the attention of caregivers who truly looked after them. 2 years later, their lives were disrupted again. Christine, having served only a few years in prison, was released and quickly sought to reclaim her family. She reconciled with Leroy. Together, they went to the orphanage to pick up the children. Travis, in particular, reacted dramatically. Having believed his mother was dead for the past 2 years, he could not comprehend her sudden return. He had also grown attached to life in the orphanage and refused to go home, kicking and screaming as he was forcibly removed. The children quickly realized that nothing about their relationship with their parents would change. And tragically, they were right. After leaving prison, Christine tried to be a good mother, but her efforts were short-lived. Her alcohol addiction quickly regained control. She spent nights drinking heavily in bars or lying incapacitated at home from hangovers. Leroy, meanwhile, continued to cheat on her with other women. The parents' toxic behavior only deepened Brookie's and Travis's feelings of resentment. Brookie eventually entered her teenage years and completed high school. Determined to escape her dysfunctional home, she sought independence immediately after graduation. With few options available, she enlisted in the army. However, the military proved a poor fit. She quickly realized it wasn't the life for her. With no other choices, she returned to her mother's house. By then, her parents had already fought and separated again, this time permanently. Travis, struggling with mental health issues, turned to illegal drugs readily available in the house and eventually became homeless. Following this breakup, Christine and Leroy went in very different directions. Christine turned to Christianity, attempting to reform her life, quit drinking, and abstain from banned substances. Leroy, on the other hand, plunged deeper into darkness. A woman claiming to be a witch entered his life, introducing him to magic, love spells, curses, and rituals meant to control others. He gradually immersed himself in her teachings, calling himself a mage, attending her basement meetings, and performing various occult ceremonies. Brookie remained living with her mother, but their relationship was far from close. The toxic family dynamic continued to weigh heavily on her. Even though Christine seemed to have found a positive direction, Brookie struggled to form healthy bonds. Mother and daughter often fought, harbored resentment, then briefly pretended to be a normal family. Influenced perhaps by her mother's religious practices, Brookie also developed an interest in non-traditional beliefs. She kept in contact with her father and, like Leroy, experimented with Satanism. Desperate to escape her home, Brookie eventually found an opportunity. She met a young man named Ray. They married quickly. The couple moved in together and soon had a child. Financial struggles added immense pressure. Brookie found motherhood far more stressful than she had anticipated. Taking care of her first child left her feeling extremely anxious. Overwhelmed and unprepared for the responsibility of raising a child, a few years later, Brookie decided she no longer wanted to be a mother and suggested to her husband that they give their child up for adoption. Ray, however, refused. A major argument broke out between them. Brookie, accustomed to using violence to solve problems, enlisted her father, Leroy, to intervene and somehow convince Ray. One day, a masked man appeared at Ray's grandmother's doorstep. When the elderly woman opened the door, he shot her in the chest. The assailant was never caught, but authorities suspected that someone from Leroy's occult circle had carried out the attack. The goal was clear: to intimidate Ray and force him to agree to give up the baby for adoption. Shockingly, the plan succeeded. Unsurprisingly, Brookie and Ray divorced soon after. She moved back in with her mother, Christine, but their relationship never improved. Mother and daughter seemed to hate each other, yet could not live apart. They constantly argued, accused each other of control, abuse. Financial troubles worsened matters. As neither woman had a steady income, they occasionally stole food from stores. On one occasion, both were caught and sentenced to 30 days in jail. Another unusual aspect of their dynamic was their approach to dating. Brookie and Christine often sought out men together, frequenting Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as hunting grounds. They would dress in their finest outfits and look for potential partners, a practice they continued for years. Eventually, Brookie managed to improve her life. She secured a steady, well-paying job, bought a new Jaguar, and saved enough money to purchase a house for herself and her mother. In 1994, at an AA meeting, Brookie, then 41, met Howard Simon St. John, a 35-year-old recovering alcoholic. Within weeks, they married. Howard moved in with Brookie and her mother. Tensions quickly escalated. Christine despised her son-in-law from the start, leading to daily arguments over trivial matters. Brookie and Christine constantly clashed as well, creating a highly toxic household atmosphere. Fed up with her mother's whims, Brookie bought an old RV, parked it near the house, and told Christine she would now live separately. With nowhere else to go, Christine moved into the motorhome, despite her good salary. Brookie's spending habits led to financial strain. Bills went unpaid. Her Jaguar payment came due with no funds to cover it. Desperate, she concocted an insurance fraud scheme, convincing Howard to help her set the car on fire to collect the payout. Late one night, Howard and Brookie drove the Jaguar to a secluded spot and torched it. The next morning, Brookie reported the vehicle stolen. The burned car was soon discovered. The insurance company paid $18,000. Brookie was thrilled. She could finally pay off debts and enjoy a more lavish lifestyle. However, detectives suspected fraud and called Howard in for questioning. Though he told them nothing, Brookie panicked, fearing that the authorities now knew everything. When Howard returned home, Brookie erupted in anger, accusing him of betrayal. True to her violent tendencies, she pulled out a gun, shot him in the neck. Covered in blood, Howard ran screaming from the house to the neighbors, prompting police and an ambulance to arrive. Brookie was arrested for domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon, and illegal firearm possession. Howard received emergency medical care and survived. She knew that Howard held the power to press charges. First, he knew about the car scam. Second, he could pursue the shooting. Initially, Howard did file a complaint, but later withdrew it. He still had genuine feelings for Brookie. She apologized, promised to change, and even offered to sign the house over to him. Howard, convinced she could reform, returned home, unaware that tragedy was still looming. Just 2 weeks after the shooting incident, Howard was found dead in the California National Forest. A passerby discovered his body lying along a riverbank not far from Brookie's house. The victim had multiple gunshot wounds and a plastic bag covering his face. Given Brookie's history of violent behavior, suspicion immediately fell on her. She was arrested, but due to a lack of direct evidence, she was released. Police speculated that Howard might have had other enemies with motives to harm him, and the investigation into his death was temporarily suspended. Brookie, apparently unable to cope with loneliness, invited her mother, Christine, back into her home. The two reconciled and decided to start fresh. Using Brookie's insurance money, they moved to Las Vegas and rented an apartment. Christine thrived in the new city, quickly making friends, attending church events, and enjoying a sense of purpose. Brookie, on the other hand, became reclusive. Increasingly irritated by her mother's renewed vitality, her mental health issues resurfaced. She began seeing a therapist in Las Vegas. During therapy sessions, Brookie recounted her traumatic childhood, described her mother's role in her conflicts with Howard, and spoke about her current struggles. The therapist concluded that Christine was at the center of much of Brookie's distress. Brookie decided she could no longer tolerate her mother's presence and began planning drastic action. One day in February 1998, one of Christine's new friends visited their Las Vegas apartment. Brookie answered the door, told her that Christine no longer lived there, claiming Christine had moved to California to live with her son, Travis, and likely would not return. The friend, puzzled, since Christine had mentioned that Travis was homeless, did not press further and left. After that day, Christine was never seen again. Christine could not have gone to her son, as Travis had been homeless and, in fact, had disappeared himself in 1993, a fact that would only come to light years later, on February 5, 2001. Exactly 3 years after Christine's disappearance, the manager of a public storage facility began receiving complaints from tenants about an unbearable stench, described by some as the smell of death. The manager inspected each unit and traced the odor to Unit 317, rented by Brookie Lee West. Unable to contact Brookie, he used a master key to open the unit. Inside, he found a sealed plastic barrel wrapped in duct tape. A dark, murky liquid was seeping from underneath it. Alarmed, he immediately called the police. When investigators opened the barrel, they were confronted with horrifying contents. A layer of maggots floated on the surface, and the internal organs had largely liquefied due to decomposition. The remains were a semi-liquid, semi-solid mass, barely resembling a human body. Despite the condition, it was clear the victim's head had been covered with a plastic bag. The advanced decomposition made it impossible to determine the exact cause of death or how long the body had been in the barrel. Identification, however, came from personal items found with the remains. The medical examiner performed an autopsy and confirmed the remains belonged to Christine Smith, Brookie Lee West's mother. Detectives immediately went to question Brookie. She claimed that her mother had moved to California to live with her son, Travis. Police found no evidence to support this claim. Further investigation revealed that Brookie had been illegally cashing her mother's Social Security checks, and her fingerprints were found on the duct tape sealing the barrel. On September 5, 2001, Brookie Lee West was arrested on suspicion of murdering her mother, Christine Smith. Faced with mounting evidence, Brookie claimed that her mother had died of natural causes. She explained that she had panicked and a woman placed the body in a barrel and then moved it to the rented storage unit. At that stage, the police only had circumstantial evidence and hoped Brookie would confess, but she did not. She insisted that Christine had died in her sleep during a short trip at a motel. The next morning, she found her mother and, not knowing what to do, panicked. She feared the authorities would not believe her and would suspect her of Christine's death. Brookie admitted to acting foolishly by hiding the body and keeping the secret, but firmly denied taking her mother's life. Of course, Brookie's story sounded implausible, and the police did not believe her. Yet, at first, time seemed to be in her favor. 3 years had passed since Christine's disappearance, and the medical examiner reported that the advanced state of decomposition made it impossible to determine the exact cause of death. The books on witchcraft and Satanism found in the storage unit suggested a potential ritual, but police quickly dismissed that theory. Brookie herself denied any involvement with dark practices. The case might have ended there, if not for the testimony of Neil Haskell, a forensic entomologist from St. Helens, Joseph's College in Rensselaer, Indiana. Dr. Haskell explained that the first insects to colonize a human body after death are typically blowflies, which appear within minutes and initiate decomposition. However, Haskell found no blowflies on Christine's body. Instead, the maggots present were primarily coffin flies or graveyard flies, which feed on corpses only after the initial stages of decomposition. To establish when Christine had been placed in the barrel, Haskell studied the larvae collected from the container. At first, he was confused by the absence of blowflies, but then he realized what it meant. Christine must have been placed in the barrel almost immediately after death, preventing blowflies from reaching her. This directly contradicted Brookie's story. In reality, it was far more likely that Christine had been alive when she was put into the barrel. Brookie's tale of her mother dying at a motel was therefore completely false. The absence of blowflies became key evidence, indicating premeditation. The police treated this as proof of deliberate murder, and the case eventually went to trial. During the investigation, even more damning evidence emerged against Brookie. In 1996, while her father was battling cancer, Brookie allegedly attacked his girlfriend, Diana, with a stun gun and tried to knock her down. Diana managed to escape unharmed. Additionally, Brookie had been cashing her mother's $1,000 monthly Social Security checks for 3 years, providing a clear financial motive. She had also attempted to cash checks belonging to her younger brother, Travis. Travis had disappeared in 1993, although his body was never found. Investigators suspected Brookie's involvement after discovering that someone had used Travis's Social Security number to register at Santa Clara Valley Medical Center. The resulting bills were sent to Brookie's address. While Travis's body has never been recovered, investigators believe that Brookie had killed him. Given her history, despite suspicions regarding both Travis and her husband Howard St. John, Brookie avoided punishment for those cases. Her trial for Christine Smith's murder began in July 2002. Brookie Lee West was found guilty of premeditated murder and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Christine Smith was 65 years old at the time of her death. She had been described as friendly, cheerful, though her difficult childhood had shaped a challenging adult life. As a mother, she made many mistakes. But later in life, she found faith in God and tried to reform. Tragically, her own daughter exacted revenge, ending her life in the most brutal way possible. In 2004, Brookie Lee West requested a retrial, again insisting that her mother had died peacefully in her sleep of natural causes. The prosecution, however, argued that the evidence supporting her guilty verdict was overwhelming. In the end, all of Brookie's appeals were denied, and her life sentence remained in place. Although Brookie was only convicted for her mother's murder, she was suspected in at least 2 other cases. She was expected to spend the rest of her life behind bars, but she had other ideas. In 2012, early one morning, as inmates were heading to breakfast, Brookie attempted to escape. She altered her appearance, dressed as a visitor, and tried to walk out of the women's correctional facility unnoticed. At 6:30 a.m., however, prison staff spotted her near the security gate by the visiting area. She was stopped just a few steps from the main entrance, mere meters from the freedom she so desperately craved. Brookie Lee West was not born a monster. She was the product of a deeply dysfunctional family. Christine and Leroy both carried their own psychological traumas, which they unknowingly passed down to their children. Brookie, however, developed her own inner demons and ultimately nurtured them over time. By the time she committed the murder, she was a fully independent adult and bore full responsibility for her actions. The night was quiet, the kind of silence that usually blankets a city after midnight. Yet inside a small apartment in northern Mexico City, something terrible was unfolding. At dawn, the police would discover a scene that no one could have envisaged. A crime so brutal, shocking it would shake an entire nation. To understand what happened that night, and how events brought matters to this point, we must go back to where the story truly began. Ingrid Escamilla Vargas was born on October 3, 1995, in Puebla, Mexico. She was one of 5 sisters and shared a special bond with her twin, Betsy. Together, they grew up in a lively household filled with laughter. Ingrid's father especially played a defining role in shaping her character. When her mother eventually left the household, her father stepped in completely, becoming both mother and father to his daughters, raising them with discipline, love, resilience. Ingrid adored him. She once described him as strong, loving, and brave, a father who gave everything, even when he had very little. His example taught her the value of perseverance and compassion, lessons she carried through her life. Ingrid was ambitious, goal-oriented. She loved learning and believed that education could open doors. After completing high school, she pursued a degree in tourism business administration, a field well suited to her outgoing personality. Her ambition did not stop there. She went on to complete a master's degree in the same field, proving she had both intellect and determination. Friends and classmates described her as organized, dedicated, full of energy. She dreamed of building a career that would allow her to travel, meet new people, and make her family proud. But in 2016, when Ingrid was just 21, tragedy struck. Her beloved father passed away, leaving a void in his daughters' lives that seemed unfillable. For Ingrid, the loss was devastating. In the days that followed, Ingrid expressed her grief and gratitude through heartfelt posts on social media. She thanked him for giving his daughters joy even in difficult times, for teaching them to smile through struggle, and for never abandoning them. She vowed to live in a way that would make him proud, and she did. She poured herself into her studies and work. Friends said she became even more disciplined and driven to honor her father's memory through her achievements. After finishing her studies, Ingrid achieved something she had worked toward for years: a position with the city council. For her, it wasn't just a job. It was the first real step toward building the professional future she had envisioned. She felt both proud and hopeful. It was in that office that she met Eric Francisco Robledo Rosas. Robledo was a civil engineer in his 42nd, born on September 22, 1973, in Puebla, the same municipality where Ingrid had grown up. He was 21 years her senior, an age gap which, while not always decisive, became a significant factor in their relationship. Eric's family was well known in the region, respected and firmly rooted in the local community. But Eric himself didn't reflect the warmth or approachability. Those who knew him described him as moody, distant, and quick to anger. His stern demeanor and sharp tone made people uneasy. One acquaintance recalled that Eric used to play baseball, yet even in a friendly game he often ended up fighting with teammates or opponents. Moments meant for leisure frequently turned into conflicts, an early sign of a man who could not control his emotions, a pattern that would follow him throughout his life. Before meeting Ingrid, Eric had been married to Yvonne Barragan, with whom he shared 2 children. Their marriage, however, was turbulent. Yvonne eventually filed for divorce, citing domestic violence, and at least one formal complaint had been lodged against him for abuse. It was an early warning about the kind of man he truly was. Ingrid and Eric first crossed paths at work. They saw each other daily at the city council. Their interactions gradually shifted from professional to personal. At first, Ingrid was drawn to his maturity and confidence. To her, he appeared experienced, someone who could offer emotional stability. Over time, they began spending more time together. Soon they were in a relationship. After several months, they decided to move in together in an apartment in Mexico City. The transition was slow. Eric settled in first, and then Ingrid, filled with hope for a fresh start, resigned from her job and joined him. Initially, neighbors noticed what seemed like a promising beginning. The couple laughed together on the balcony, went shopping hand in hand, and appeared affectionate in public. But the facade quickly crumbled. Within weeks, arguments erupted. What began as minor disagreements escalated into loud, violent confrontations that filled the building with shouting and thuds against the walls. It soon became clear that Ingrid's new life was far from the dream she had imagined. As time passed, Ingrid began to withdraw. She rarely left the apartment, and when she did, neighbors observed how drained and distant she seemed, nothing like the vibrant young woman she had once been. There were rumors that Eric had arranged with the building concierge to deny entry to anyone seeking to visit Ingrid when he wasn't home. It hinted at the level of control he exerted over her, a form of isolation that stripped her of freedom and autonomy. On social media, however, Ingrid tried to preserve an image of normalcy. She posted smiling photos and scenes of apparent calm, but beneath the surface, small clues suggested she was suffering. According to testimonies, Ingrid attempted multiple times to escape the abusive relationship. She confided in people around her and even sought help from authorities, filing at least one report for mistreatment. But nothing came of it. The system that should have protected her failed to intervene, leaving her increasingly vulnerable. The emotional strain of her situation grew immense. Neighbors recalled an incident that shocked the entire building. Ingrid attempted to take her own life. The situation was so severe that both police and firefighters had to intervene to save her. It was a desperate cry for help, one few understood fully at the time. Though authorities prevented tragedy that day, nothing truly changed afterward. Inside the apartment, the emotional climate remained volatile. The shouting continued. The tension persisted. Tragically, the warning signs were ignored. In the early hours of February 9th, 2020, the story reached its devastating end. According to his later testimony, Eric came home intoxicated after a night of drinking. The air inside the small apartment was already thick with months of resentment, tension, and fear. It took only minutes for yet another argument to ignite. The shouting escalated quickly. Words turned violent. And in a fit of uncontrollable rage, Eric grabbed a kitchen knife, lunged at Ingrid. He stabbed her in the neck, a wound that killed her almost instantly. But the horror didn't stop there. Consumed by a cold, incomprehensible fury, Eric began mutilating Ingrid's body. He removed pieces of her skin and internal organs, as though trying to erase what he had done. Investigators would later say that the level of violence was unlike anything they had ever encountered. A crime so savage it would haunt the country for years. After killing her, Eric made a gruesome attempt to dispose of the evidence. He dismantled the toilet and tried to flush some of Ingrid's organs down the drain. But they were too large, clogging the pipes almost immediately. When that failed, he placed other parts of her remains into plastic bags, seemingly preparing to dispose of them elsewhere. Adding to the tragedy, his 15-year-old son, who reportedly has autism, was present inside the apartment during these horrific events. Eric still believed he could regain control, that he could somehow cover up the crime. After the murder, Eric called his ex-wife, Yvonne. His tone was calm but chilling. He told her he had killed Ingrid. Yvonne didn't hesitate. She immediately notified the authorities. Police units were dispatched to the northern Mexico City apartment without delay. What they found inside would later be described as one of the most disturbing crime scenes in recent memory. Blood covered the floor. Plastic bags containing human remains were scattered around the room. The toilet had been dismantled in a failed attempt to eliminate evidence. Eric was still there, sitting beside Ingrid's body, his clothes soaked in blood. He made no attempt to flee or resist, When officers confronted him, he confessed immediately. He said he had killed Ingrid during an argument that spiraled out of control and then tried to destroy her remains. There was no ambiguity. He was arrested on the spot, and the apartment was sealed for forensic examination. The next day, February 10th, 2020, Ingrid's remains were released to her family. Her family brought her back to her hometown, where she was mourned and laid to rest. The atmosphere was thick with sorrow, disbelief, and anger. As Ingrid's coffin was carried through the streets, neighbors gathered to pay their respects. Their sorrow quickly turned into collective indignation. How could someone so young, so full of promise, be taken in such a brutal way? But in the days following the murder, as her family struggled to understand the enormity of the loss, something happened that deepened their pain, sparked national outrage. Photographs of Ingrid's mutilated body, taken illegally by public officials at the crime scene, were leaked to the media, spread across social networks. The images, graphic and horrifying, stripped Ingrid of her dignity even in death. What should have been handled with care, respect, became another act of cruelty and violation. The leak exposed a deep and troubling flaw within the system, a complete lack of proper protocols to safeguard victims' privacy and protect the integrity of criminal investigations. Public outrage quickly grew into a nationwide debate about accountability, ethics, and the culture of impunity within law enforcement and the media. People demanded justice not only for Ingrid's murder, but also for the cruelty inflicted on her after death by those who should have protected her. Under intensifying social pressure, the government opened an investigation into the public officials involved in the leak. The public's fury didn't remain confined to social media. Just 5 days after the murder, on February 14th, 2020, feminist groups and citizens poured into the streets of Mexico City. Valentine's Day, typically a celebration of love, became a day of anger, mourning, and collective grief. Thousands marched toward government buildings and media outlets carrying signs that read, "Justice for Ingrid and ni una más." The protests soon escalated. A vehicle belonging to a media company was set on fire, a symbolic act against the outlets that had sensationalized and exploited Ingrid's death. It was a moment that captured the exhaustion and fury of women across Mexico, tired of violence, tired of indifference, and tired of justice perpetually delayed. 2 days later, on February 16th, another march followed, this time outside the building where Ingrid had been killed. Her family, neighbors, and activists gathered for a candlelight vigil, holding photos of her smiling face. The investigation into the leaked photographs moved slowly, but progress eventually came. In December 2020, nearly a year after Ingrid's death, authorities announced the arrest of a police officer accused of distributing the images. For Ingrid's family and the feminist groups who had fought relentlessly, the arrest represented a small but meaningful victory. It could not restore Ingrid's dignity or undo the trauma, but it delivered a clear and long overdue message: those who abuse their power and dehumanize victims will be held accountable. Her case sparked broader institutional reforms as well. The government began reviewing internal protocols to prevent similar violations in the future. Ingrid could no longer speak for herself, but her story compelled others to speak for her, to demand structural change and real accountability. In 2021, court hearings officially began against Eric. Throughout the proceedings, Ingrid's mother became a powerful symbol of resilience. She attended every hearing, faced the cameras, and spoke with unwavering determination. The legal process stretched into 2022, marked by delays and emotional strain. On October 12, 2022, the court declared a recess to carefully review the evidence before issuing its verdict. Finally, on October 13, 2022, the tribunal found Eric Francisco Robledo Rosas guilty of the femicide of Ingrid Escamilla Vargas and sentenced him to 70 years in prison, the maximum penalty allowed by law. He was also ordered to pay 616,100 pesos in damages and cover the funeral costs. For Ingrid's family, the sentence was a long-awaited step toward justice. It could not bring her back or erase the violence she endured, but it affirmed the value of her life. Ingrid's case left deep scars on Mexican society. The brutality of her murder, the cruelty of the leaked photos, and the national outrage that followed transformed her into a symbol of resistance, change. Her story became part of a larger movement, a voice for every daughter, sister, and mother lost to gender-based violence.